The stage rattled along the last mile of rutted track as dawn unstitched the night over Greystone Ridge, a coal-dusted town perched on the high Wyoming tableland. Evelina Whitlock sat alone on the rear bench, hands folded and finger-locked. Prayer, even though her lips refused to move. She had stopped praying out loud years ago, on the day flames turned her first life to cinders, and now conversation with God happened in a hush far behind her ribcage, safe from other people's pitying ears. The sway of the coach rocked her like a cradle, but no warmth rose with it. The cold here was different, an iron taste she could neither swallow nor spit out. She pulled her threadbare shawl higher to hide the copper-pink scar that climbed from the soft hollow under her left ear, curved like a question around her cheekbone and disappeared into her hairline. Two children riding opposite stared at it until their mother yanked them away as though scars were catching. Evelina smiled anyway, the small, aching smile she had practiced in cracked mirrors while rehearsing the courage to leave St. Louis. The smile said, "I am harmless." Even when the rest of her face muttered, "I remember fire," she had answered an advertisement printed in a railway broadsheet. "Widower seeks industrious Christian woman, respects silence, desires companionship more than beauty. Letter to C. Avery, Greystone Ridge, Wyoming Territory, fare provided, respects silence." The words lodged in her chest like a promise. A woman who had spent 5 years listening to her own heartbeat echo in loneliness could appreciate a man who did not require endless small talk. She wrote back, told her story bluntly. Burn-scarred, 27, childless, good with accounts, literate in Latin and English alike. 4 weeks later, the return envelope arrived, a single rail ticket and 5 sentences penned in an angular, almost reluctant hand. Mrs. Whitlock. "I can offer a roof, a garden, and enough work to keep a mind busy. If that suits, take the evening train on the 3rd of May. Someone will meet the coach at Greystone Ridge." C. Avery. There had been no declaration of devotion, no promise of roses or redemption, yet its restraint steadied her more than any oath could have. Grand words burned faster than tinder. Evelina trusted quiet things now. The driver reined in atop a rise. Below, the town unfurled. 2 parallel streets, a chink of silver mines scarred into the butte, smoke from the boiler house smearing the sky. Rough plank buildings crouched beside false-fronted stores, painted in colors already surrendered. To the wind, she read the sign nailed to the depot roof. "Welcome souls," and wondered whether the painter intended comfort or dark humor. Greystone Ridge smelled of coal soot and pine tar. Men in canvas coats shuffled along boardwalks, boots drumming a dull tattoo. Women carried laundry to lines already stiff with frost. Hard country carved everything here, faces, breaths, even hope, into lean shapes. When Evelina stepped down, conversation ebbed like water sucking from shore. She felt the hush press against her scar, as if trying to measure its depth. Her trunk thudded onto the platform. No one came forward with a placard bearing her name. The guard tipped his cap, climbed back aboard, and the coach rumbled away, leaving red dust curling around her skirts. Someone will meet the coach. She repeated the sentence inside her skull, holding its edges like a lawyer holding the original. Terms of a contract. Maybe she was early, maybe he was late, maybe she had been a fool to board in the first place. Rain-bleached notices littered the depot wall, auction announcements, missing mule sketches, one wanted poster ghosting. In the wind, beneath them another sheet caught her gaze. Matrons of Greystone Ridge Ladies' Society. Decency Committee meets first Monday each month. All newcomers to report for review. Charity begins with cleanliness. Review, Evelina thought, tasting the brittle syllables. She looked down at the faint soot smudge on her skirt hem, then at her gloved hands, meticulous stitches she'd sewn herself along creases because tailors charged extra for disfigurement. Pride straightened her spine for precisely 3 seconds before a voice shattered the fragile quiet. "Stage late again, missus." A man lounged against a post, hat brim tugged low. Not the man from the letter, unless C. Avery smelled of rye. "Whiskey and wore turquoise rings on every finger. I beg your pardon," she said. The words carried that eastern lilt she had never quite managed to sand away. He tipped his head, grin slanted. "You beg a lot. You'll get nothing except a sore back." Laughter burbled from his companions, 2 stocky fellows, whose coats couldn't hide the pistol hilts kissing their ribs. He pushed away from the post and circled her trunk. "These here's Avery's initials. You his new purchase." The word stabbed harder than any blade. Purchase. She folded her arms, knitting fingers tight to keep them from shaking. "I am his correspondent," she corrected. Same difference. He wedged his boot on the trunk as though claiming it. "Silent Charlie ain't sent word 'bout no widow lately. But maybe he likes 'em burnt so they don't burn him." A flush crawled her neck beneath the scarf. The men's greedy silence tried to lever open her resolve. She recalled the odor of burning wood, the way laughter could pivot into screams. When fire found flesh, she would not relive it here. Straightening, she fixed the man with the same stare she once used to balance merchant ledgers. "If you are done, I shall wait inside." He caught her elbow. "Easy, pretty ugly, just joshing." The nickname, half compliment, half cruelty, soured the morning air. She yanked free, but his grip only tightened, pushing sleeve against scar tissue until pain flared. His friends hooted like coyotes, scenting blood. What happened next arrived so quietly she nearly missed it. The fingers crushing her arm slackened, the man's grin faltered. The air itself seemed to retreat. Evelina followed his gaze to the far end of the platform, where a lone rider sat astride a mud-dusted Mustang. The cowboy's Stetson cast a long brim shadow, and his oilskin duster swallowed him whole, turning him into an outline more than a man. He did not speak. He did not dismount. He merely waited, still as a scarecrow, yet freighted with some invisible gravity that bent everyone else's attention. The grip on her arm disappeared. "Morning, Charlie," the ring-fingered bully chirped, voice thinned to a schoolboy squeak. "Didn't see you there," Charlie said nothing. "Just helping the lady is all." The man stepped back, his boot bumped the trunk, and he stumbled before catching balance. "She was lost." Charlie still said nothing. The bully touched 2 fingers to his hat, then backed away until distance freed him to pivot and hurry down the platform, his friends scuttling behind. Lee-gray dust swallowed their retreat. Only then did the cowboy swing down. He crossed the boards with a gait both measured and unhurried, like a river insisting it would reach the sea on its own time. Close now, Evelina could gauge his height, tall enough to blot scenery, shoulders sculpted by labor, unshaven jaw, bronze cheekbones weather-cured by wind. Above the kerchief masking half his face shone eyes the color of dawn-striking coal, 2 coals that refused to burn out. He lifted her trunk, as if lifting a loaf of bread. Then, with a nod toward the waiting Mustang, he indicated she should follow. Not a single syllable left his throat, but the calm decisiveness of the gesture uprooted any argument she might have sown. They rode through town. She side-saddled on the pack-horse he'd brought, he leading, wordless. At the corner saloon, laughter ebbed again. Evelina realized silence followed this man like a cloak. Doors half-closed themselves as he passed. The hush was not respect exactly, not fear, but some alloyed mixture neither pure nor simple. On the outskirts he reined in beside a weather-grayed farmhouse nestled low against cottonwood and sage. Smoke trickled from a rock chimney. A coop of speckled hens patrolled the yard. It was humble, but the fencing stood straight, and every tool on the porch was oiled, sharpened, ready, evidence of a mind that believed order warded off chaos. Charlie unloaded her trunk onto the porch, then tethered horses. Inside, he led her to a kitchen, bright with morning sun filtering through muslin curtains embroidered, she noticed, with mountain bluebells. Someone had taken time to stitch beauty, where eyes might rest while slicing bread. He pulled out a chair for her, set a tin cup before her, poured water from a crock. She swallowed gratefully. The cup's cool rim steadied trembling lips. "I expected a letter," she said at last, voice echoing unnaturally in his silence. "Or at least your foreman." Charlie untied the kerchief, revealing a mouth bracketed by lines of habitual reticence. When he spoke, the sound surprised her, low, rounded like river stones turning under current. Foreman took sick, that was all. Not quite apology, not quite explanation. He studied her, gaze never lingering on the scar longer than on any other fragment of her face. "I am Evelina," she offered, hands twisting in her lap. "Evelina Whitlock. The word widow lodged in her throat. She swallowed it, coughed. "Thank you for meeting me." Charlie dipped his head once. An acknowledgement, perhaps. He poured a second cup, sipped. The silence between them felt less like awkward pause, more like carefully tilled soil waiting for seed. She inhaled slowly, bread dough rising somewhere, varnish of pine, a faint clove scent that might have clung to his coat from earlier tobacco. Outside, a wind chime tinkled. She realized each tube was not brass but spent bullet casings polished. To shine. A practical reclamation, maybe a warning. When Charlie spoke again, she startled. "Town ain't gentle." He looked toward the scar, but not at it. "You sure?" Was she sure? She thought of her burned family home in Missouri, the church ladies whispering, "Why did God spare her face at all?" The older men pressing to take pity on the poor damaged blossom with hands that would only bruise. She saw again the railway ad promising companionship, not beauty, and the ticket that had felt like a key turning in a lock. "Yes," she said, a single syllable that tasted like iron and sunrise. "I'm sure," Charlie nodded. He stood, collected straw hat from hook, and headed toward the barn door. At the threshold, he paused, half-turned. Suppers at dusk, wood piles thin. It took a moment to parse his meaning. Invitation, expectation, not demand. She followed him outside, found the axe lodged in a stump beside a stack of unsplit pine. Her father had taught her the rhythm before fire unmade the farm. Muscle memory rose, guided the swing. The first crack of the blade into wood rang across the yard, chasing away lingering coach dust from her lungs. The sun scaled high, then tipped westward. Evelina wiped sweat with her sleeve, creating fresh smudges the matrons of decency would surely notice. Chickens clucked approval, as if rating her form. Charlie appeared, carrying 2 saddle blankets now weighted with late-season apples. He set them by the kitchen door and retrieved the wheelbarrow she'd stacked with split logs. Their eyes met, neither spoke, but something unspoken passed. "I see your work. I respect it." Supper simmered in a pot of salt pork, beans, and apple. Peel, a thrift stew she improvised while he stored the wood. While it cooked, she explored the house. Single hallway, 2 bedrooms, small room lined with books. She traced spines, Plutarch's Lives, Audubon's Birds of America, a leather diary gap-toothed with blank pages. On the desk lay a lone photograph, sepia portrait of a woman whose expression mirrored Evelina's own worn hope. At the bottom, a fading inscription. Caroline, 1865. Heat flushed her cheeks. She had trespassed on memory. She closed the door softly and returned to the kettle. At dusk, they ate in near silence, cutlery clicks, crackle of kindling. She stole glances when he bowed his head over food. In firelight, his hair shone copper at the tips, a faint scar cut through one eyebrow. Old violence. His hands, though broad, handled tin spoon with deliberate care, like each motion deserved respect. Afterward, he carried dishes to the basin, but she waved him off. Her turn. So he retreated to the porch, lit a match, and tamped tobacco into a pipe. She washed plates, glimpsing his silhouette between curtains. Twilight wrapped him in indigo. Ember glow painted his cheekbones gold. Was she truly safe here? The question shadow-stepped her heart, but found no answer. Safety had burned away in Missouri. Perhaps she should not expect it again. But she recognized something else tonight, dignity. Charlie Avery gave her that, as though it cost him nothing, when many had guarded it like coin. Later, in the smaller bedroom prepared for her, Evelina unfurled linen sheets smelling faintly of lilac water. Someone, Caroline, had embroidered the hem with looping initials, C.A. saw. She traced them, wondering what loss or choice left these linens unused until now. She lay down, listening to wind worry the eaves, and waited for nightmares. None came. Morning found her on the porch steps, coffee steaming between chilled fingers, watching the sky bleed gold through ragged clouds. Charlie exited the barn, leading 2 saddled horses. "Ride to town," he said. "Need flour? Need you seen?" The latter half raised her pulse. "Seen?" He nodded. People talk less once they know who they're talking about. So she rode at his side through aspen scrub painted with autumn rust. Gravel popped under hooves, ravens flapped overhead, and though words were scarce, the silence felt companionable, not crushing. At the general store, Mrs. Tilley catalogued Evelina's scar with a single gasp, then busied hands counting beans that did not require eye contact. Mr. Tilley belted flour and coffee with jute twine, clearing his throat 3 decibels louder than necessary. Charlie thanked him with a slow tip of the hat. Evelina murmured the same, cheeks burning but chin high. Outside, children gathered near the hitch rail, staring until bravery tipped one forward. "Mr. Avery, is she really your wife?" the boy asked. Charlie glanced at Evelina before. Nodding once, the boy looked disappointed. No spectacle here, then spat in the dust and ran off to chase something less settled. The word wife jammed the wheel of her breath. They had spoken nothing of ceremony, nor of expectations, yet the town already filed her under a new ledger. She ought to protest, clarify they were only companions by contract, yet some fragile part of her wanted the falsehood left intact. If only to armor her until she could forge truer steel. They packed supplies into saddlebags, but Charlie lingered as if waiting. She followed his line of sight to the Matrons of Decency Hall, across the street where 6 women stood like a picket fence. Their eyes flicked over Charlie respectfully, over his holster more so, then landed on her with a chill that set every burn scar itching. The tallest, Mrs. Edith Langtree, lifted her chin. "Mr. Avery." A word. Charlie's silence settled like lead. Evelina wondered if he would refuse. Instead, he stepped forward. Mrs. Langtree folded hands over a Bible bound in worn red leather. "We admire your charity, truly, but the Ladies' Society must safeguard moral instruction. This widow," she did not grace Evelina with a glance, "arrived. Without committee acknowledgement, we request her presence next Monday for review." Charlie's jaw shifted once, a muscular tick. "No." The single syllable fell heavy as a hammer. "Pardon." Mrs. Langtree blinked. "She's under my roof. Needs no review." He touched brim. Conversation over. Gasps floated like sparks. A younger matron whispered something about ungodly scars and bad omens. Evelina's shoulders curled, but Charlie turned, offered her the bundle of flour as if conferring a medal. They mounted. The horse shifted. She swayed, steadying herself with a palm against saddle leather still warm from sun. Pride sparked. She had not ridden since before fire, yet her body remembered. Mrs. Langtree called after them. "Charity is not license for sin, Mr. Avery. We will pray for your discernment. Evelina braced for Charlie's retort, but he clicked his tongue, and horses moved. Wind carried Mrs. Langtry's words backward until they unravelled to silence. Halfway, home they crossed granite flats where ancient petroglyphs etched elk and spiral suns into stone faces. Charlie dismounted to check a loose shoe on Evelina's mare. While he worked, she traced a spiral carved centuries earlier. Her fingertips tingled, as if the past spoke through heat-scarred nerves, reminding her everything burned eventually, but patterns remained. Charlie straightened, wiped hands. Without speaking, he removed a leather glove from his left hand, revealing skin latticed in faded whip welts. He offered the hand to her. She hesitated, then placed her scarred palm against his scarred one. Two maps of pain aligned. He nodded, once as though a bargain unspoken had nevertheless been struck. They rode the rest of the way in near dusk, lantern light already glowing from farmhouse windows. Evelina dismounted, muscles humming from strain, but heart lighter. She carried flour to the pantry, rearranged shelves so labels faced forward. Order wove calm. Charlie fed horses, then joined her inside where stew scented the kitchen anew. Over. Supper, he said. Langtry'll push again. I am not afraid of Bible verses, Evelina answered, though her voice betrayed a tremor. He studied her over rim of cup. Fear's fine. Courage just means doing it anyway. The sentence surprised her, lengthy by his standards, and warmed something deep. Later, drying dishes, she asked, Charlie, about the advertisement, what companion did you hope to find? He stoked coals, gaze reflecting red. One who hears quiet, one who stays. Her chest tightened. I have spent 5 years staying nowhere, she thought, because nowhere asked me to stay. She opened her mouth, but words fluttered like trapped moths. None escaped. Sunday came, and with it church bells solemn as funeral chimes. Evelina. Dressed in her plainest navy wool, the colour merciful to scarring, and pinned hair low. She expected Charlie to join. Instead, he saddled her mare, pointed toward town. Your faith, your choice, he said. She rode alone, feeling stairs prick like nettles all along Main Street. Church benches creaked when she entered. Whisper current flowed. Up front, Reverend Hill's sermon about the Good Samaritan twisted, strangely to emphasize cleanliness. Mrs. Langtry nodded whenever scars were equated with hidden sin. After service, parishioners milled outside beneath brittle sunlight. A teen boy pointed, a girl snickered. Evelina inhaled through teeth, but then a small hand slipped into hers. The littlest Langtry girl, maybe 5, studied the scar with unabashed curiosity. Does it hurt? Evelina knelt. Only when people stare unkindly. The child touched the raised pink line. Feels like a riverbank, she whispered. Awed, Mrs. Langtry yanked the girl away, scolded. Unclean, Evelina heard before she mounted to depart. At home she found Charlie whittling by barn steps, curls of cedar piling like feathers. She dismounted harder than intended. Anger shook her bones. He watched but did not interrupt. When words finally cracked free, they spilled hot. They called me unclean before they even knew my name. He nodded as though confirming whether. He'd already predicted. Mine called me mute, half-wit, rebel runoff before they heard me speak. She sat on the step opposite. Why do they fear what they don't understand? He set knife aside. Fear's easy. Easier. Then learning. Silence grew, but not empty. She sensed him waiting for her next move, the way a dance partner waits for music to choose where feet should go. And surprising herself, she let the fury fade, replaced by steadier resolve. Monday, she said, I will attend the ladies. Society review, Charlie's brow rose, told them no. I will not hide, she answered, but I will not go alone. He considered. Then a crease at mouth corner hinted at some private amusement. Take Sarah." He whistled. From pasture trotted a chestnut filly too young for hard labor, eyes bright with mischief. "Sarah." Evelina stroked the star on the horse's forehead. He shrugged. "Strong, survived spring blizzard, nobody thought she would." The glance he gave Evelina suggested parallel, unspoken. Monday dawned under bruised clouds. Evelina dressed. In charcoal grey trimmed subtle lace, she braided hair, left scar uncovered, no more hiding. Charlie hitched wagon. Town waited. Greystone Ridge's meeting hall smelled of starch and damp hymnals. 12 matrons sat in semicircle chairs, Reverend Hill behind them like a judge at sentencing. Evelina stepped to center. Charlie remained at doorway, arms crossed. Presence filling gaps her voice might fail. Mrs. Langtry opened a ledger. "State your name for record." "Evelina Whitlock Avery." The surname slid out before she could second guess. She felt Charlie's attention sharpen. She did not. Retracted gasps. Quill-scratched ledger. Occupation. Bookkeeper, seamstress, vegetable gardener when soil cooperates. Previous congregation. St. Mark's, St. Louis. Murmur. Reason for relocation? She steadied breath, met every eye. To live without being caged by other. People's pity. The sentence stunned even Reverend Hill. Mrs. Langtry recovered first. "Pity is Christian charity, Mrs. Avery." "Pity is counterfeit compassion," Evelina replied. "It masks fear." Quill hovered mid-stroke. "And what do you fear?" "Only flame," she answered, voice low. "Because it taught me. Pain can cleanse or consume. People choose which." No one spoke. Wind rattled window panes. Somewhere a door slammed. Mrs. Langtry closed ledger. "The committee is concerned your appearance may unsettle children." Evelina's heart hammered, but her tone held. "Then teach children scars are maps of survival, not signs of shame." Charlie stepped forward, boots echoing. "Enough." Reverend Hill cleared throat. "Brother Avery, respect our process." Charlie's eyes blazed. "Process asked no questions of minors missing fingers, asked nothing of veterans missing eyes. Her scar just shows on the outside." A hush deeper than any previous settled. Finally, unexpectedly, Mrs. Langtry's young daughter emerged from behind curtain where children waited. She carried a bouquet of meadow asters, walked to Evelina, and placed them in her hands. "Mama says flowers heal," she whispered. Tears stung Evelina's good eye. She knelt, hugged the child briefly. When she rose, Mrs. Langtry looked away, lashes trembling. Reverend Hill set ledger aside. "The committee thanks Mrs. Avery for her candor. There will be no further review." Relief and disbelief braided inside Evelina, but Charlie tipped hat, hand steady on revolver belt, not as threat, but as reminder. Some silences held thunder. Outside, clouds cracked and rain spilled, first heavy drops since her arrival. Townsfolk dashed for awnings, street dust puckered into dark freckles. Charlie guided her beneath smithy overhang. Rain drummed, forging hush between world and them. She looked up, rain shining scar tissue like polished ribbon. "Thank you," she said. His gaze softened. "Didn't do nothing. You stood." A simple statement, but her voice thickened. That mattered. Charlie removed hat, let rain soak hair, copper black. "No," he said, voice deepening. "You stood." Lightning vein lit distant sky. Thunder rolled, and in that elemental hush before next breath, before crowd's noise resumed, before decisions calcified into memory, Charlie Avery lifted her hand, burn-mapped, rain-slick, and pressed his lips to the scars beginning beneath her ear. The kiss was featherlight, not a claim yet, but a vow waiting its time. Evelina's pulse answered like hoofbeats on hollow ground. The moment stretched until raindrops slowed to individual jewels. Then a shout erupted from down street, gunfire, shattering glass, horses screaming. Men burst from saloon doors, brandishing rifles, and chaos knotted the muddy road. A stranger had come to town, and he carried trouble the way lightning carries fire. Charlie released her hand, eyes flint-sharp now. "Stay here." He strode. Into storm, rain turning coat to obsidian, moving toward the growl of danger with that same unhurried gait as on the depot platform, as though he had already walked through every bullet once before. Evelina pressed Asta's to chest, heart drumming. Fear rose, but something fiercer rose faster, the realization that whatever unfolded next, she would no longer be passenger to her own fate. She stepped from cover, rain baptizing scar and skin alike, and followed the silent cowboy into the swirling dark. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're from. If this story moves you, please subscribe. Tomorrow I have a special story for you. Greystone Ridge woke under a pewter sky the morning after Evelina Whitlock's arrival, and the coal soot that always sifted down from the breaker chutes settled over the town like a fresh layer of judgment. Every boardwalk, every porch rail, every hat brim carried the faint black sprinkle, and Evelina felt the same weight on her shoulders the instant she stepped out of Mrs. Landry's lodging house with the rent paid 1 week in advance. Her trunk, battered oak, brass-banded, and bearing the scorch mark that defined her life, remained upstairs, too heavy for her healing arm. The scars across her left shoulder and ribs still snarled when she bent, an old garden of ruin left by fire 3 years earlier, but the pain had become background noise. What she had not yet learned to ignore was the way people looked at that. Ruin when accident or wind pulled her shawl aside. This morning, the street was busy. Miners trooping toward the slope mouth, women with washing baskets, 2 schoolboys chasing an apple core. Conversations faltered as she passed. The hush traveled ahead of her, the way a bow wave folds around a ship's prow, and by the time she reached the mercantile, the porch was silent, save for the wheeze of the swinging sign overhead. Inside, she found paper, ink, a box of sewing needles, and a tin of coffee. She placed each item on the counter with deliberate care. She had promised herself calm, always calm, and when Eli Proctor calculated the bill, he did not meet her eyes. "Need anything else, Mrs. Whitlock?" he asked, voice gruff, with a cordiality that felt practiced. "Yes," she answered, adjusting the shawl. "Respect would be welcome." His right eyebrow twitched, but before he could reply, the shop door banged open and a gust of September. Wind rifled the bolt of calico on the counter. 3 men entered, rail-thin Franklanders, who ran the livery. Deputy Vernon Cragg, all badge and swagger. And a third Evelina did not know, broad-shouldered, with a shovel beard and a scowl. Etched on granite, Cragg tipped his hat. "Mornin', missus." The honorific dripped amusement. She could taste it on her tongue. The bearded stranger stared. "That the scarred one?" he asked Cragg, as though she were a barn calf for sale. Cragg shrugged. "Likely so." Came. "In yesterday on the stage. Town still buzzin' about how Wilson's bride run off, and we got stuck with this." Evelina breathed through her nose. Calm. Always calm. "I am not stuck," she said quietly. "Merely passing through until the circuit judge finds Mr. Wilson and annuls his fraud." The bearded man's lip curled. "Who'd want the likes of you anyway?" She heard Proctor's pencil snap behind the counter. Cragg chuckled. "Easy. Harmon, the ladies knew, still got to learn Greystone manners." "Manners?" Evelina repeated. She pushed the coins across the counter to Proctor with one scarred hand. "Seems to me I'm learning them quick enough." Cragg's jaw tensed. Landers shifted uncomfortably, his long fingers worrying the brim of his hat. Harmon spat on the floorboards, the glob of phlegm landing perilously close to Evelina's boot. Before Evelina could speak, the door swung again. A tall rider entered, coat damp with coal rain, hat brim shadowing his face. Silence flooded. The store, a deeper quiet than before, until even Harmon's breath went shallow. The newcomer removed his hat. His hair was black, unruly. His eyes, grey as shale, settled on Evelina, Silas Brant. The name travelled across the room in Proctor's whisper. Brant said nothing. She would learn he rarely did, but the look he gave Harmon was a smith's hammer on hot metal. Harmon shifted, cleared his throat, muttered something about tack oil, and retreated toward the back shelves. Cragg found a smile. "Mornin', Silas." Brant inclined his head. 2 fingers moved to the brim of his hat in a gesture that was not quite a salute, not quite a wave. Then he turned to Evelina and extended a small folded square, an oilskin packet of wildflower. Seeds. She stared, uncertain. He placed them on her stack of purchases, tipped the hat again, and left the store without a word. Mrs. Landry leaned on the banister of her front parlour when Evelina returned, coffee tin under one arm, needles, and seeds in her pocket. The landlady's mouth tightened at the stains on Evelina's shawl. Coal dust never came out, but she gestured Evelina upstairs. "You been summoned," she said. "Reverend Tolliver wants a word. Half the ladies' aid with him, too." Evelina's stomach knotted. "About what?" Landry snorted. "About you, would be my guess. Folks here crave a good symposium on sin." The church occupied a rise at the north end of town, whitewash peeling in sad curls. Inside, the smell of hymnals and damp wool mingled with something sharper, disapproval steeped like old tea. 6 women sat in the front pew, bonnets quivering. Reverend Tolliver stood before the pulpit, Bible open, though his eyes never left Evelina's face. "Mrs. Whitlock," he began, lips pursed, "your situation has raised concerns. My situation, the matter of your scars." Heat crawled up her neck. She pulled the shawl tight. "I assure you, Reverend, burns are not contagious." A twitter of nervous laughter from the pew, then immediate silence. "It is not disease we fear, but impropriety." Tolliver lifted a hand, forestalling protest. "Mrs. Wilson, your intended's mother, claims you misrepresented your, condition." Evelina's heart hammered. He saw my daguerreotype. The scars are evident. His mother lies. A rustle. One bonneted head turned to whisper to another. Evelina spoke louder. "Josiah Wilson pledged before witnesses to honor our contract. He left me stranded the moment he beheld me in person. Now he hides in Cheyenne with my dowry." Tolliver's brow darkened. "You brought a dowry?" "Of course. I am not indigent." Another whisper, sharper this time. A woman near the aisle, Mrs. Sutter, milliner, leaned forward. "If you possess money, Mrs. Whitlock, why seek marriage at all?" Evelina met her gaze. "Because some ambitions are larger than one pair of hands. I intended to start a school." This caused genuine surprise. Sutter's lips parted. Even Tolliver blinked. "A school? For girls? Coal towns educate. Ore and timber, not daughters. I hoped Josiah would share that vision." The Reverend closed his Bible. "Commendable. Yet optics matter. Children are impressionable. Your scars may disturb." Evelina's voice trembled but held. "Children see what adults teach them to fear, Reverend." Silence lodged in the rafters. Tolliver sighed. "I will pray." For clarity. She bowed stiffly and left, their eyes pricking her spine. Outside, on the church steps, a figure waited, Silas Brant, hat in hand. He offered no greeting, only nodded and walked beside her down the hill. His presence, a paring blade to the thick air behind her, felt like armor. By dusk, rumors had outrun Evelina's own footsteps. Mrs. Landry reported hearing that scars were punishment for secret sin, that she herself set the fire for insurance, that she was barren and hunting a fool. Each story hammered another nail into the lid of Evelina's old life, until by evening she sat at the writing desk, composing a petition to the Cheyenne court. Steady script, iron grammar, requesting replevin of her dowry. A knock interrupted. Landry opened the door without waiting. "Visitor," she said, then paused as if reconsidering what counted as visitor. "It's the Brant fellow." Evelina's pulse leaped. She smoothed her bodice and descended. Brant stood in the foyer, had brim rolling between his fingers. Behind him, twilight bruised the sky. "I haven't thanked you," she began. He raised a hand. "Enough." Then he produced a slip of paper, a deed stub for a vacant lot east of Maine. On it, a penciled note. "Could house a school." Evelina's breath caught. "This is yours?" A nod. "Why, show me." He met her gaze, grey eyes steady, and pointed to her heart with 2 fingers, then tapped the paper. The meaning unfolded in her mind like the germ of a seed. Her vision, his land. Before she found words, shouting erupted outside. Men's voices, angry, and the distinctive jangle of a wagon chain. Brant moved first, swinging the door open. In the street, a small crowd circled a makeshift gallows. A sawhorse draped with canvas bearing a crude charcoal drawing, a woman's face half burned. Above it, a sign, "Monsters not welcome." Evelina's heartbeat thundered in her ears. Cragg stood among them, Harmon at his side, holding a lantern. The deputy's grin died when he saw Brant step into the glow. "Evening, Silas," Cragg called. "Community art project, no law against satire." Brant's face remained unreadable. He descended the steps, boots crunching gravel, and stopped before the gallows. With one motion, he snapped the uprights, wood cracking like a shot, then hurled the canvas to the ground. "What's the matter?" Harmon jeered. "You sweet on the scarred lady?" Brant shifted. Moonlight spilled across the street, and Evelina saw the change, the way his shoulders squared, chin lowered. A ripple of apprehension passed through the crowd. Cragg laid a hand on his gun belt. "Easy now." Brant lifted one finger to the brim of his hat, the same half salute he'd given in the store, then pointed that finger at Evelina watching from the porch. Slowly, deliberately, he touched his own chest, then extended the finger toward the street and drew an invisible line in the dirt between her and the rest of the town. Mine. The declaration needed no voice. Gasps fluttered through the onlookers. Harmon spat. "You claiming a freak, Brant? Take her then, but understand, cattle born wrong get culled." Brant's hand dropped to his sidearm. Cragg's did the same. The tension strung so taut, Evelina feared the night would snap. She stepped forward, skirts brushing the porch rail. "Silas," she called, the name tasting bold. "Not like this." He did not turn, but his shoulders eased a fraction. Cragg barked a laugh false and loud. "Listen to your missus, Brant. Town's got rules. You want her, fine, but keep her behind shutters. Folks don't need nightmares on our streets." Evelina's cheeks flamed. "I carry no plague." Harmon lit another lantern, lifting it high so the light washed her face. The crowd stared, some curious, some pitying, most revolted. Children's eyes glinted among skirts. That, more than anything, knifed Evelina's resolve. She inhaled, the coal soot air burned, and began down the steps. Brant's hand hovered near his revolver, but she pressed her palm against his arm as she passed. The muscle beneath was iron. She faced the crowd. "Look well," she said. "See what fire can do." Her voice wobbled yet rose, but see also what survived. She placed the wildflower seeds at her heart. Cinders can birth blossoms if tended. A murmur swept the onlookers. Not agreement, but uncertainty, the first crack in a wall. Cragg spat. "Pretty words won't change hides." "Then I'll change minds," she answered. She turned to Brant. "Will you help me build the school?" He nodded once, the motion crisp as a signed contract. A hush settled. Even the lantern flames seemed to bow. Cragg's lip curled, but he stepped back, holstering his Colt. Harmon's shoulders slumped. One by one the crowd dispersed, whispers trailing like smoke. Brant watched until the last silhouette melted into darkness. Then he faced Evelina. Moonlight silvered his profile, sharp cheekbones, jaw set with something between vow and warning. He extended his arm. She took it. Together they ascended the porch, the broken gallows lying in splinters behind them. 2 days later, the sky cleared, wind sweeping coal dust eastward. Evelina walked the scrub lot Brant had deeded. Sage and rabbit brush grew in untidy patches, but when she knelt and pressed her palm to the soil, moisture clung to her fingers. Good earth. She imagined walls rising, classroom chalk squeak, desks of plain pine, girls reciting sums. The vision unfurled like sunrise behind closed lids. Footstep. She opened her eyes to find Brant beside her, hands deep in pockets. He offered a notebook, pages blank. For lesson plans, she guessed, a nod. Then he pointed southwest toward distant mesas where rust clouds towered. A supply train would arrive in a week. Lumber, glass panes, hardware. Brant produced a folded manifest. At the bottom, in tight script, paid in full. SB tears blurred the mesas. "Why?" she whispered. "You don't know me." He touched the raw edge of a scar peeking above her collar, then laid that same finger over his own breastbone. His eyes said, "Pain knows pain." Wind gusted. From town came a clamor, hammer on tin, a cry. They turned. Smoke ribboned above the livery. Shouts grew frantic. Brant sprinted. Evelina followed, lungs burning. By the time she reached Main Street, flames licked the stable roof. Landers stumbled out, coat aflame, screeching. Brant doused him with water from a trough, then charged through the doors. Deputy Cragg blocked Evelina. "Stay back!" "Horses. You must cut them loose," she cried. Inside, rafters groaned. She saw Brant vanish into the smoke. Heart hammering, she grabbed Cragg's discarded axe and followed before reason could command otherwise. Heat punched her. Shadows writhed, horses shrieking, walls sparkling with ember dust. Brant swung a stall gate. A bay mare bolted. He was a silhouette in devil light, coughing but relentless, slicing leads, shoving beasts toward daylight. A beam crashed. Evelina screamed. He whirled. It pinned him knee-deep in debris. Sparks showered. She hewed at the timber, muscles straining. Memories roaring, another fire, another man trapped. Not again. The beam shifted. Brant shoved free and seized her wrist, dragging her toward the door as the roof sagged. They burst into daylight, the instant the livery collapsed behind them in a fount of sparks. Townsfolk cheered, then hushed when they saw Evelina, soot-blacked, hair singed, hand clasped with Brant's. Cragg approached, eyes wide. "You two, saints preserve us." Brant released Evelina only to sway, knees buckling. She caught him. His sleeve was scorched, flesh blistering beneath. Panic fluttered. She pressed her palm to his chest. "Steady heartbeat, but weakening. Doctor!" she cried. No answer. Greystone's physician was out on a mining accident call 10 miles north, Cragg cursed. Bleeding hell. He looked at Evelina, shame and fear twisting his features. "What do we do?" She met his gaze. All the judgment of days past shrank under the urgency of this single life. "We save him," she said, voice steel. "Find cool water and bring the laudanum from the mercantile." Cragg hesitated, then nodded, and sprinted. Evelina knelt, cradling Brant's head. His eyes fluttered open, storm grey tinged with pain. She stroked soot from his cheek. "Stay," she whispered. "Stay for the school. Stay for me." His lips moved, no voice, yet she read the word. Always. But the skin on his arm bubbled angrily, and fever already licked his brow. The crowd pressed, offering cloths, buckets, prayers. Somewhere a child began to sob. Evelina's own scars throbbed in phantom sympathy. Cragg returned with bottles, bandages. Together they worked, cool compress, trimmed blister, opiate to dull agony, but Evelina saw the doubt in the deputy's eye. Infection, fever, death. She would not accept it. "He saved your horses," she told Landers who huddled nearby. Hands singed hair, smoking. "Fetch ice from the brewery cellar, now!" Landers fled. She ordered others, sterile cloth from the boarding house, boiled water from the cafe, and they obeyed, the circle of fear transforming into a chain of purpose. Yet as night deepened, Brant's breath grew shallow, the fever climbed. Evelina held his hand, refusing to let go even when Cragg suggested rest. Around midnight, Brant's eyes opened, clear for a moment. His fingers traced letters on her palm, L-I-G-H-T. She understood. The lamp beside the bed. She lit it. Flame bloomed vang across the room. His gaze found the brightness, and he smiled, a soft, exhausted arc. Then convulsion seized him. His body arched, teeth gritted. Evelina screamed for help. Cragg burst in, but before he reached the bed, Brant's back bowed once more, and stilled, silence crashed down, heavier than any beam. Evelina pressed her ear to his chest. No heartbeat. A void yawned inside her, vast as the fire that scarred her life. She shook him, slapped his cheeks. "No, you do not leave." Cragg pulled her back. "Mrs. Whitlock," her scream ripped the air. "He breathed moments ago." Cragg's face crumpled. He began the sign of the cross, but Evelina heard something, the faintest gurgle. She pushed past Cragg, placed both palms over Brant's sternum and pressed. 30 count. Breath to mouth. Again. She had studied life-saving essays once, long ago, when ambition looked like medicine. Rhythm, press, breathe. Minutes felt like years. The room spun. Cragg muttered prayers. She refused to stop. Then a gasp. Sharp. Brant's chest heaved. Eyes shot open wild with pain and confusion. Evelina collapsed against the bed, sobbing, laughter tangled with tears. Brant's hand rose weakly and brushed her cheek, leaving a soot smear like war paint. In the hallway, townsfolk erupted into relieved chatter. Someone began singing a hymn off-key. Cragg wiped his eyes. Brant gripped Evelina's wrist, surprising strength, and tapped her scars with 2 fingers before resting that hand over his own heart. "Yours," the touch said. Evelina pressed her lips to his knuckles. "And yours are..." "Mine," she whispered. Outside, in the darkness beyond the open window, a new wind stirred, one that smelled less of coal dust and more of rain-washed earth. But far off, at the edge of hearing, another sound gathered. Hoofbeats on hardpack. A rider bearing a telegram from Cheyenne raced toward Greystone Ridge, and the message he carried would change everything. For the ink was still wet on Josiah Wilson's petition, sworn before the circuit judge, claiming rights to the Whitlock dowry and seeking legal possession of the woman herself. The silent cowboy's claim was about to be contested, and Evelina's brand-new heartquake threatened to fracture before it could fully bloom. And as the church bell's single, hollow note dissolved in the wind, Evelina understood the prairie had judged her a second time. She stood beneath the sign that read, "First Baptist of Greystone." Letters faded to the color of old bone, and watched the pewter sky fissure into sleet. Everything hurt. Her ungloved fingers raw from carrying the trunk, her right hip still bruised from the stage's last spine-snapping rut, and worst of all, the January air scraping across the scar tissue that shaped half her face into someone else's mask. Inside the vestibule she had found only disappointment, Reverend Morgan's terse condolences. "Mr. Rowe succumbed to fever 2 weeks past, ma'am. I wired the news, but apparently the stage outran my telegram," and a recommendation that she apply to the Ladies' Aid Society for temporary charity. Charity. The word tasted like coal dust on Evelina's tongue. She drew the scarf higher, over her cheek, and pivoted to leave, nearly colliding with the tall figure who'd trailed her from the livery. She still did not know his name. The townsfolk called him the Silent One, the Line Rider, Holt's Ghost, any number of frontier superstitions, but nobody used a Christian name. He wore a duster the color of gunmetal and carried himself like a man half-stitched to the horizon, more rumor than resident. Their eyes met beneath the sagging porch roof. His were riverstone grey, unblinking and soft where they settled on her scars, not hard the way everyone else's became. "Thank you," she murmured, though he had done nothing more than follow her, wordless from the livery to the church. An escort maid of silence. She had not meant the words to shake, but they did. He tipped his hat in acknowledgement or apology. She could not discern which, then stepped aside so she might pass. The duster's hem whispered against the plank floor, and the sound reminded Evelina of a hawk's feather brushing stone. Light, sure, dangerous if misjudged. The walk back to Mrs. Landry's boarding house was only 3 blocks, but Evelina counted 17 sets of eyes tracking her progress. A seam opened in the milling crowd as she approached the mercantile, children clutching their mothers' skirts, lamplighters pausing mid-reach. The postmistress's dog even ceased its frantic yapping to stare. Her scar asked the questions so her mouth wouldn't have to. What happened to the promised husband? What kind of widow arrives alone? The townspeople answered by retreating another half-step, as though misfortune might prove contagious. At the corner, a drunk broke the hush. "Hideous luck, boys, mine and yours both." He thrust a bottle toward Evelina in unsteady salute. "Bride's cursed, sure as prairie blight. See there? Devil's lightning kissed her cheek." The silent one emerged from between 2 wagons before Evelina could draw breath. He said nothing. He only looked at the heckler. Something in that flint-grey gaze carved the laughter from the drunk's throat. The man lowered the bottle, shuffled sideways, and vanished into the alley. Evelina's relief surprised her, not because a stranger had defended her honor, but because a stranger's silence felt safer than the town's chorus of half-hearted sympathies. She risked a glance toward her guardian, meaning to offer gratitude, but he was already gone, folded back into Greystone's soot and sleet as though he had never stood there at all. Mrs. Landry kept her promise. Supper was served sharp at 6. No talk of payment until a body had eaten, and nobody but nobody asks pry-in questions at my table. Even so, Evelina sensed gossip perspiring through the wallpaper. Boarders murmured over stew, pretending not to stare at the seam where scar met healthy skin. Across the table, the foreman of the Ridgeline Coal Company cleared his throat. "Ma'am, begging your pardon, the Reverend sent word you're newly widowed." Evelina folded her hands. "Widowed before the marriage? It could occur. Mr. Rowe passed on Christmas Eve." Condolences rose and fell around the table like a lull in wind. The foreman dabbed his moustache. "Terrible shame. Still Greystone's short on nurses since the fever. If you've a mind to work, the company infirmary pays honest." "I intend to earn my keep," Evelina answered too quickly, because gratitude felt akin to begging. "Thank you. Aunt Prudence," she insisted every young woman call her that, tutted into her handkerchief. "Bless your heart, child, but them scars—" She caught herself, managed a watery smile. "I only mean the patients can be skittish." Evelina's spoon halted midair. Skittish, a polite synonym for frightened, which in turn was a Christian country euphemism for repulsed. She looked down the length of the table, past bowed heads and averted gazes, and understood the infirmary foreman would rescind his offer the moment she presented for duty in full daylight. Evelina finished her stew without tasting it. By 7:30, the men had gone back to the mine, the elders to scripture study, the young brides to darning. She retired to the front parlor, where the town newspaper lay folded on a divan. 3 times she opened to the classifieds. 3 times she closed them again, ink smudging her fingertips like gilt. 1,200 miles she had traveled on the promise of a new name and a quiet future. Mr. Clark Rowe's letter, careful penmanship, gently formal, smelling faintly of lilac water, had vowed she would be cherished. Now he rested under frozen soil, and she possessed nothing but an outdated invitation. Find another path. The thought surfaced with the sting of ammonia. She traced the scar that began at her temple, curved beneath the eye, and stopped at the jaw's corner like a question mark. She stood, lit the kerosene lamp despite Mrs. Landry's disapproving cluck, and began a list. Positions, At the coal. Infirmary unlikely. Seamstress work. Thread caught on scar tissue. The sensation made her breath hitch, but possible. Cook. She could feed 20 men on half a larder, but burns and steam. The skin would protest. Governess? No family wealthy enough in Greystone to hire one? The pen hesitated at the final line. She wrote it anyway, small and defiant. Leave before dawn. Return east. Fold the list. Tuck it inside her bodice. Footsteps on the porch startled her. Heavy, deliberate. The door rattled. Snow hissed against pane glass. Mrs. Landry poked, her head in. Visitor for you, Miss Whitlock. A coal miner entered, hat clutched like contrition. His address was formal, too formal for a shackled man. Name's Jonah Ward, ma'am. Got word you might be able to stitch up a wound. Cost, of course, paid fair. Evelina blinked. I am no doctor. You're better'n we got, which is nothing. He gestured outside where a mule brayed. Fellow took a pickaxe to the calf. Needs cleaning and thread before infection sets. Mrs. Landry looked doubtful, but Evelina's reply came firm. Bring him to the kitchen. Boil water. We'll need carbolic if any can be spared. Jonah exhaled relief. I'll fetch him. As the woman of the house scurried for towels and spirits, Evelina set her shoulders. She had tended furnace, burns, gunshot rot, childbirth tears in the Kansas relief camps. Work no Eastern lady would claim, but work that saved souls all the same. Minutes later, 2 men half-dragged, half-carried the injured miner onto the pinewood table. Blood soaked the trouser to mid-thigh. The pick's bite gaped like a second mouth. The smell, iron and coal dust, terror and sweat filled the kitchen. Evelina commanded without apology, Hold him, tight, this will hurt. The patient's screams rattled cupboards as she irrigated debris with boiled water, probed for splinters, and stitched muscle to muscle, skin to skin. She worked by lamplight until her hands cramped. All the while the boarders hovered in the doorway, first curious, then admiring, then hushed as church mice. When at last the bandage wrapped snug, Evelina's dress looked like a war flag. She straightened, dizzy, but before the darkness at the edge of vision could claim her, someone eased a steadying arm beneath her elbow. His scent, sagebrush and saddle leather, made identification unnecessary. The silent one. Jonah Ward cleared, his throat, eyes bright. Bill owes his leg to you, ma'am. Reckon the company owes wages in kind. He pressed silver into her palm. Too much silver. Evelina tried to refuse. The miner overruled her with a shake of blood-spattered bandages. Take it. Folks'll remember tonight. Only after they'd gone, patient hobbling between friends like a victorious soldier, did. She realized the silent one still braced her arm. He guided her to a chair, retrieved a fresh basin, and began rinsing the gore from her knuckles. She flinched at his gentleness. Sir, that is unnecessary. He neither nodded nor spoke, merely tipped more water across her wrist. The water ran pink, then clear. Will you not tell me your name? She asked, exhausted. He paused, squeezed the cloth, and finally answered. One word, husky with disuse. Calder. It hung between them like prophecy, until Mrs. Landry bustled in, cheeks flushed, to announce cocoa and sponge cake for the heroine. By week's end, Evelina had cleaned 2 knife wounds, set a fractured thumb, and comforted an influenza, orphan in the night kitchen. The foreman hired her on the spot at double the proposed wage. No patient balked at the scars after watching her needle chase death from a pickaxe wound. Pay in hand, she rented the corner attic, eaves slanted but private, and used her first. Wages, to order a second-hand coat thick enough to defy Wyoming's dagger wind. Greystone still stared, but the staring felt different now. Weighted not with suspicion, but with the uneasy awe towns develop toward anyone who has bartered with blood. She slept dreamless the night before the Fenwick baby came 3 weeks early. Mrs. Fenwick's labor lasted 11 hours. The doctor, summoned by rail from Cheyenne, arrived at the 12th with whiskey on his breath and gave Evelina a single command: "Hold the lantern, girl, and pray it's a boy." It was a stubborn infant with lungs like a church organ. But Mrs. Fenwick bled after the third push. Evelina placed the doctor's trembling hands where they belonged and whispered the instructions she remembered from Kansas. Together, they saved mother and child. At dawn, snow gutted off the Fenwick roof. Icicles speared the lilac bushes outside. The doctor pulled Evelina aside. He was a man twice her age, and in that moment, half her courage. "Miss Whitlock, you have surgical sense." He fished a card from his vest. "Cheyenne General will sponsor nurse training. Write to this address." Evelina traced the gold letters. Dr. Jameson Carter, surgeon. Education meant freedom. Freedom from pity wages. Freedom from Greystone's gossip. She thought of train whistles and eastern cities that never slept. Leave before dawn. Return east. The list's final line ghosted her conscience. She pressed the card into her reticule. February thawed just enough to turn road ice into glass. Calder appeared outside the infirmary each dusk, waiting to escort Evelina the 4 blocks home. He offered no explanation, and she demanded none. Together they walked through sleet that cut sideways like hatchet blows. Rumor painted him everything from widower to thief. But Evelina heard what gossip missed. The way children laughed when he repaired a broken sled runner. The soft word he spared for Widow Haskell's lame mare. He had kindness sewn into him, invisible thread the world kept overlooking. One night, sheltering in the narrow overhang of the general store, Evelina risked a sideways glance. "Do you ride the line every day?" He nodded. "All the way to the Pine Barrens?" Another nod. "And you never speak?" A pause. "Sometimes." The syllables felt molten, newly forged. Light spilled from the store window, painting half his jaw amber. A scar bisected his upper lip, a pale ridge, old as childhood. The thought startled her. He knows how it feels then. Sleet tapped Calder's. Had brim like coins in a tin. Crystalline stubble rhymed the collar of his duster. He reached into the pocket, produced a folded scrap, and held it out. She accepted. The note, penned in a hand too neat for any coal company clerk, read, "Snowmelt floods the North Ridge come spring. Keep the infirmary stock on the 2nd floor. Advice, not small talk." She met his gaze, intent. "You saved equipment last." "Yeah." He shook his head. "No." Then pointed to the scar on his lip. "He nearly drowned retrieving supplies someone else failed to lift." Evelina's chest tightened. She refolded the warning. "Thank you." Calder's gloved hand rose, hesitant, unsure, and for a heartbeat hovered near her ruined cheek. The gesture felt enormous as a sunrise. He didn't touch her. He didn't need to. Snow hissed between them, a promise of rivers to come. The flood arrived early. A black torrent sluicing down from the broken mine sluiceway. It struck mid-shift when the infirmary was quietest. Water battered the door in a single monstrous fist, shattered glass, and roared through hallways like a locomotive unhooked from its brakes. Evelina was charting temperatures. One moment ink flowed steady. The next, her pen jerked as the floor listed. She glimpsed water up to her ankles and climbing. Patients shrieked. Bandage crates spun by like white-wrapped corpses. She seized the nearest cot, a delirious boy with coal lung, and hoisted him across her shoulders. "Stairs!" she shouted, but the stairwell was already a waterfall. A crash answered, the back door ripping from hinges. Through the breach surged Calder, waist-deep, bracing against the current with a timber. In the window's wild glare, his eyes found Evelina. He nodded once. She hauled the boy onto a countertop. Calder planted the timber as a brace, forged a makeshift bridge. One by one they ferried patients. 3 consumptives, a miner with splints, 2 fever women, across the drowning hallway into the storage loft. Water climbed past Evelina's knees, thighs, hips, each degree colder than the last circle of hell. When the final patient was safe, the timber snapped. A wall of water punched Evelina backward. She slammed into shelving. Breath vanished. The current spun her, sucking toward the collapsed stairwell and the black sluice beyond. Then arms, iron, hard, closed around her waist. Calder's grip. He kicked off a floating crate, leveraging momentum, and together they slammed against the loft ladder. He shoved her upward before scrambling after. The loft door slammed shut an instant before water annihilated the last rung. Below, silence, except for the ocean rage beneath their feet. Lantern light tremored over 12 faces watching Evelina, half in terror, half in faith. Calder knelt, vomited river water, rose again without a sound. Evelina laid a hand on his forearm. Her lips formed the word alive. He nodded. Outside, floodwater hammered. Inside, prayers intertwined with coughs and fever dreams. Evelina rationed morphine, counted pulses, tied tourniquets where debris had gashed new wounds. Calder found blankets and wrapped each patient like winter wheat in burlap. Hours passed, or minutes, or an epoch. Finally the roar faded to a groan, then a gargle, then nothing at all. Dawn's pallid light seeped through loft slats, carrying the stink of river mud and broken timbers. Calder levered open the trapdoor. A stairwell of muck waited below. He tested the first step, then turned, raising one eyebrow. Permission. Evelina squeezed his hand. Together, they descended into ruin. The infirmary lay gutted. Cots overturned, cabinets burst, the floor a carpet of shattered apothecary jars, glittering like deadly gemstones. Ruin, yet every soul had lived. Outside, Greystone gathered in shell-shocked clusters. Mayor Aldridge arrived on horseback, boots splattered, eyes wild. Sweet Lord, the whole North Gully gave way. River took half the mule barns. He stared at Evelina, at Calder, at the human chain of patients hobbling behind them. How by He couldn't finish. Mrs. Fenwick, pale but steady, stepped forward. They saved them, both of them. She looked at Evelina's soaked dress, Calder's bleeding knuckles. They saved us all. A hush spread. One by one, miners removed their caps. Women bowed heads. The hush thickened into reverence. Evelina felt a strange weightlessness, not praise, something quieter, heavier, belonging. After months of polite avoidance, Greystone saw her, scar and all, and their eyes did not flinch. Calder leaned in, voice rusted but certain. Stay. A single syllable, and yet her heartbeat pitched like a startled colt. She thought of Cheyenne's offer tucked into her reticule, education, escape, a city that wouldn't know her scars on sight. She thought of Greystone's soot. Its suspicion turned fragile admiration, and the silent cowboy, whose steadiness felt like a refuge she had not dared imagine. She began, but the mayor's cry cut across the street. Another break! South Ridge, mine shaft 6, boys trapped. Panic erupted. Women screamed names. Men ran for shovels. Evelina met Calder's gaze. He was already turning toward the ridge, duster flaring like a storm cloud. She followed without thinking. The decision tasted of iron and river water, and something perilously close to hope. Halfway to the ridge, she remembered the doctor's card bumping her thigh with every stride, and how, in her haste, she had left the reticule atop a drowned cabinet in the infirmary loft. The wind carried Greystone's church bell into frantic, uneven peals. Evelina pressed a hand to her scar, skin still numb from flood cold, and ran harder. Ahead, Calder disappeared over the rise where black smoke now flowered into the dawn. Her future waited in that smoke, suspended between a silent cowboy and a promise she had not yet spoken, and Evelina understood the next hour would decide everything. That had long ago learned the shape of winter, Evelina's breath plumed white as she pushed open the warped church door. The sanctuary smelled of coal smoke trapped beneath cedar rafters and of the faint metallic tang of lantern oil. Pews stood in soldier-straight rows, half of them listing from loose joints, their hymnals dog-eared by decades of dry prairie hands. No one sat inside yet. The midweek morning service would not begin for an hour, but she needed the stillness, needed a place where she could steady her pulse before facing the town again. She crossed to a side window whose murky panes looked north toward the freight tracks. The horizon there was nothing but slag heaps and a tangle of rails that glimmered when sun found a gap in the clouds. Greystone Ridge existed at the mercy of those rails. They brought coal cars, itinerant miners, and sometimes, if rumor held, disaster. Evelina knew something about disasters arriving on iron wheels. The smell of scorched upholstery rose in her mind, and for a heartbeat she was back in that other life, inside a Pullman coach filled with shrieking and heat. She shut her eyes and counted 4 slow breaths. When she opened them again, she met her own reflection in the rippled glass, a faint outline scarred over one cheek like scorched silk. Outside, sleet hissed against the panes, and beyond it she could just make out a lone figure moving along. Front Street, a tall man whose hat brim shed water the way a slab sheds sparks. He walked with the deliberate economy of a trail rider who understood distance the way other men understood scripture. She watched until he passed beyond sight. No hurry, no hesitance, just a steady beat that seemed older than the town itself. Dr. Hinges groaned behind her. Reverend Ashby, a narrow man whose frock coat had been out of fashion since the war, stepped in, doffed his hat, and froze the instant he saw her. "Mrs. Whitlock," he said, recovering. "You gave me a start. Thought I was alone with the Almighty for a spell." The forced humor fell flat, landing between them like a cracked plate. "I needed quiet," Evelina replied, voice low. She tugged her shawl tighter. "If I'm trespassing—" "Nonsense." Ashby glided toward the pulpit, fussing with a stack of hand-copied sermon notes. "The Lord's house has no lock. Though—" and here his gaze caught the scar despite his effort not to stare. "Some of the flock may find your presence at weekday service surprising. They're creatures of pattern, you know. Disruption unsettles them." "So I've learned—" Evelina thought. Out loud she asked, "Is it true the mine expanded into Defender's Gulch?" Ashby blinked. "Where did you hear that?" "Millie Landry's boarders chattered about it at supper. They say the vein runs under the north pasture. That pasture belongs to a ranch called Half Moon, doesn't it?" He set his notes down, expression tightening. "Half Moon was foreclosed last season. Rail Company holds the deed now. Hard times, Mrs. Whitlock. Hard for honest men to keep land when the earth beneath it fetches more as coal than as wheat." She pressed for more, sensing a fulcrum. "And who manages the company's interests out here? Surely not those gamblers we saw outside the depot yesterday." The Reverend's sigh fogged in the chilly nave. "Silas Varner, overseer for Central Continental Coal, a man who believes profit is proof of divine favor." Ashby's gaze drifted toward the door as if expecting Varner to stride in at the mention of his name. Evelina stored the detail. Silas Varner, the same name scrawled in several of the company ledgers she'd glanced at while passing the bank window the day she arrived. Numbers always told stories, and these stories were rarely merciful. A hammering wind rattled the eaves. The church door banged twice, and 2 women hurried inside, Mrs. Riddell, the postmaster's wife, and Dorothea Green, whose husband ran the general store. They stopped short at the sight of Evelina. "Mornin', Reverend," Mrs. Riddell chirped, then added with a sidelong glance, "Didn't realize service started early." Ashby forced a smile. "It hasn't." Mrs. Whitlock sought shelter from the weather, a common courtesy. Dorothea's gaze slid over Evelina's shawl, her skirts, and finally the scar. "Of course," she murmured, though her eyes said, "a courtesy." Perhaps better enjoyed elsewhere, Evelina gathered what remained of her calm. "I'll leave you to your preparations." She offered a nod and slipped between the pews toward the aisle. As she passed, Mrs. Riddell's perfume, lavender water hiding the sharper notes of gossip, flooded Evelina's senses, and she caught whispered fragments. Burn victim, tragic, mail order. Why would any man? Her palms dampened inside cotton gloves. She quickened her stride, pushing through the door and into sleet so fierce it felt made of needles. The boardwalk outside the general store was slick ice masquerading as cedar planks, and Evelina near lost her footing before an arm braced her elbow. She jerked back on instinct, fear flashing hot, but the grip gentled, steady, patient. The tall rider she'd seen from the church stood beside her now. Up close, she noted details. A coat of worn russet canvas patched at the elbow, gloves mended with twine, eyes the same sober blue as twilight over snow. His brim dipped in acknowledgement, yet he offered no greeting. "Thank you," she managed, shifting her weight to safer purchase. He inclined his head once more, then stepped aside as quiet as shadow. Inside the store, a bell jingled. Evelina entered, shaking sleet from her shawl. Shelves lined with sacks of flour and tinned peaches greeted her. At the counter, Dorothea Green, having bested Evelina here by a quicker route, rummaged under the cash till. She looked up, pinched a smile, and said nothing. Evelina requested quilting thread and kerosene. Dorothea fetched them in silence, the tolling hush between them broken only by the scrape of coin across oak. When Evelina turned to leave, the shop door swung inward once more, admitting Silas Varner. Varner removed his bowler with theatrical care. He was barrel-chested, his moustache waxed into cruel points. "Mrs. Green," he drawled, "I trust my shipment of blasting caps arrived? The once-promised Tuesday delivery has become Thursday dilatory." He flicked a cufflink, diamond bright. Dorothea flinched. "The freight car got held at Casper, sir. Weather?" Varner laughed. The Almighty's favorite alibi. His eyes shifted to Evelina, pausing on the scar with undisguised interest. "And who might this delicate figure be? I don't recall seeing you at Sunday worship." The implication, perhaps she lacked the moral fortitude for church, hung heavy. Evelina matched his gaze. Evelina Whitlock, new to Greystone. She pivoted toward the door, but Varner eased sideways, blocking her path. "Whitlock? Any relation to Captain Mortimer Whitlock of the 6th Cavalry?" The question slithered, testing her. "He was my husband," she said, voice even as snow. "He died 3 years ago at Big Horn." The fire had come later, but Varner didn't need that chapter. A tiny creak of floorboards sounded behind. Someone stepped through the threshold, and Varner's posture shifted. Evelina sensed rather than saw who it must be, the silent rider. Varner cleared his throat. "My condolences." He tipped his hat and stepped aside. Evelina slipped out into sleet that now mixed with gritty ash carried from the breaker towers. She half expected the rider to follow, to offer further assistance or some courteous remark, but when she glanced back, he remained inside, hat in hand, speaking not a word. Mrs. Landry's lodging house stood 3 blocks south, its gingerbread, trim blackened by coal dust. Evelina mounted the porch, unlatching the door with stiff fingers. Warmth hit her in layers, wood stove heat, paraffin lamplight, and the yeasty comfort of rising bread. In the parlour, Millie Landry practiced scales on a square piano, whose ivories were scalloped from a generation of use. The woman's back straightened at Evelina's entry. "Storm caught you," she observed, eyes crinkling. "Just sleet." Evelina slipped off her gloves, tucked the kerosene beneath a sideboard. Millie closed the piano lid. "Letter arrived for you. Postboy dropped it a moment ago." She produced an envelope, brown paper, edges damp. The script was bold, masculine, ink bled where the sleet had kissed it. Evelina's pulse spiked. She scarcely knew anyone west of Omaha. She slit the flap. "With a hairpin, Whitlock." Your name reached me by rail ledger. Folks say you came west seeking employment. Half Moon has need of a bookkeeper. My books run straight, but auditors from Central Continental arrive next month, and they prefer columns written in ink rather than dirt. If you can add faster than a rattle, the sentence cut mid-line. Waterblot had swallowed the rest. At the bottom, a signature, Caleb Hart, Foreman Hart. The name clanged a faint bell. Perhaps she'd seen it on a property transfer notice tacked inside the telegraph office. Half Moon, the ranch foreclosed but not yet stripped for coal. Why would a defunct ranch need a bookkeeper? Evelina flipped the sheet. P.S. scrawled along the margin. Ride north at dawn. Show the driver this letter. She reread the lines twice, feeling the shape of a chance widen in her chest. Since arriving, she'd sought any work that did not involve stoking stoves or laundering miners' coveralls. Bookkeeping was honest, clean and familiar. Numbers didn't recoil at burned flesh, but a question loomed. How had Caleb Hart learned of her exactly? Ledger gossip travelled, but rarely this swiftly. A rumble on the porch, then boots crossed the threshold. Millie started an introduction. Mr. Quinn, but fell silent when she noted the man's dripping coat, his silence. He removed his hat, rainwater darkened the brim, and nodded at Millie before turning to Evelina, those twilight blue eyes. Mrs. Whitlock, Millie continued, confusion knitting her brow. This is Alden Quinn. He keeps horses for Half Moon. Evelina finished, memory stitching letter to man. You delivered coal last night? He nodded once. Millie glanced between them. You two acquainted? Not precisely, Evelina said, heat rising beneath her scars. Quinn extended a small oilcloth, parcel. Inside were 2 fountain pen nibs and a half-full bottle of violet ink. Hart, he said, voice low, rough from long disuse but clear. Sends these, for ledgers. Only 5 words, yet each carried weight, as though he spent them like coin. Evelina's hand trembled slightly when she accepted the parcel. Tell Mr. Hart I'll ride north at dawn then. She smiled, awkward, hesitant. Thank you for earlier, near the boardwalk. Quinn's mouth curved in what might have been the ghost of a smile. He touched the brim of his hat, a gesture that felt older than both of them, and retreated into sleet. Millie exhaled a breath she'd apparently been holding. That one speaks less than a stone cherub, she murmured. Still, I'd sooner share a room with him than Silas Varner. You be careful heading to Half Moon. Folks whisper the ranch is cursed. Bad accidents. Men disappearing in the gulch. Some say Varner aims to speed the curse along with dynamite. A curse seems the least of it, Evelina replied, folding Hart's letter. If Varner covets the coal seam, anything standing in his path courts ruin. Night fell early. Evelina packed by lamplight. 2 calico dresses, 1 pair of boots, the silver chatelaine her mother had pressed into her palm on the wedding day that ended in grief. She slept little, mind-tallying risks against prospects until dawn leaked, pale over the horizon. At first, rooster crow she descended the stairs, trunk in tow. Millie met her with coffee and a parcel of biscuits. Quinn's outside, she said. He'll get you to the ranch road. I told him if you don't write by Saturday, I'm sending the sheriff after you. Evelina squeezed the woman's hand. Gratitude. Too big for words. Outside, sleet had silenced itself, leaving the world glazed and brittle. Quinn waited by a 2-horse rig, steam puffing from the team's nostrils. He took Evelina's trunk, stowed it without comment, then offered a gloved hand to help her onto the seat. The moment their wheels left town, quiet wrapped them, only the crunch of ice beneath iron rims and the far cry of meadowlarks shaking frost from their wings. Evelina studied Quinn from the corner of her eye. Hair dark as walnut bark, jaw set in thoughtful lines, a faint scar along the ridge of his left brow. Sun-bleached, old. A man stitched together by silence and road. When she spoke, her voice surprised them both. Were you at Bighorn? He glanced over, puzzled. In '78, she clarified, 6th Cavalry, saying it reopened thin-edged memories. Her husband's letter before the battle, the hush of telegrams. Quinn's gaze drifted to the horizon before he answered, I rode dispatch for the paymaster. Missed the fight by 2 hours. Another pause. Sorry for your loss. War writes its own arithmetic, she said, words tasting of cold. I've made uneasy peace with the sum. She traced the seam of her glove. Is Hart kind? I've learned kind men are rarer than honest ledgers. Hart keeps his word, Quinn replied. That passes for kindness out here. Miles later they swung, northwest, leaving the rail bed for a narrower track that snaked through pine and sandstone, clouds shredded, revealing a sky so blue it hurt after days of smoke grey. The wagon crested a rise, and half-moon spread below, a whitewashed bunkhouse. 2 corrals, a weather-beaten barn with the ranch brand burned over the doors, a crescent cradling a lone star. Beyond, pastureland unfurled toward Defender's Gulch, where dark spoil piles betrayed the coal veins' reach. Quinn reined in at the porch of the ranch house. Hart's inside. I'll stable the horses. He alighted, offered her a hand down, then wheeled the wagon away. Evelina steadied herself, brushed road dust from her skirt, and mounted the porch steps. The door stood ajar. She knocked. Come, a voice barked. She entered a room, half office, half kitchen. Ledgers towered like tinder around a man in shirt-sleeves rolled to the elbow. Caleb Hart, a rangy figure with iron-grey hair pulled club-style at the nape, looked up. His eyes, flint-sharp, measured her. Evelina Whitlock, he said, confirming. The match. Did Quinn ride you roughshod? Man forgets roads are for wagons, not broncs. The journey was smooth enough, she answered. Hart pushed aside columns of figures. I need order before auditors circle like buzzards. Varner's itching to declare us insolvent, drive his boreholes, and leave this country hollow. You up? For a fight that looks like numbers. Numbers I understand, she said, and I know something of men like Varner. They worship margin sheets. She placed the ink and nibs on his desk. Shall we begin? Hart's laugh cracked the quiet. You're hired. Quinn will see you to the ledger room. Maud, our cook, sets supper at 6. Until then, he gestured at the paper mountains. Wrestle the chaos. Evelina rolled her sleeves, inhaled the scent of dust and old ink, and felt, for the first time since stepping from the stage, a flicker of belonging. Night settled over half-moons soft as wool. Evelina worked under lamplight, untangling months of entries. Outside, coyotes knotted their songs with the wind. She heard bootsteps pause at the threshold. Alden Quinn leaned against the jamb, arms folded. Hart says you chase numbers like a bloodhound, he murmured. She smiled without lifting her pen. Numbers don't lie. People do. True. He studied her a moment. Town says you're mail order, that Whitlock was only one husband. You seeking another? The bluntness startled her. Heat flared under her collar, but she kept her tone level. Town gossips love a tidy headline. I came west for work, not matchmaking. Widowhood taught me vows aren't ironclad. She paused, ink poised above the page. And you? The town speaks of a silent cowboy who never laughs. What binds your tongue? His jaw worked, words rusting. Some debts get paid in silence. He tapped the doorframe twice as though ending the subject, then said, Storms rolling up from the basin. If Varner aims to blast gulch walls, he'll do it before frost sets deep. Evelina set her pen aside. Then we'd best balance the books before he lights the fuse. Quinn's eyes held something. Approval, perhaps, or simple acknowledgement. Of shared purpose. He tipped his hat and retreated into dusk. Evelina watched the lamp flame gutter as wind worried the eaves. A distant rumble. Thunder. Or dynamite. Hard to tell across so many miles of lonely dark. She dipped her pen, bent to Hart's ledger, and wrote a single sentence in the margin beside the day's totals. Profit is more than coin. It is the sum of what a man refuses to sell. Outside, somewhere beyond the corrals, a horse nickered, and in that sound lived a promise she could not yet name. Rain arrived at midnight, cold, driven sideways, needling through chinks in the bunkhouse walls and drumming on the main house roof with a fury that erased sleep. Evelina lay on a pallet in the ledger room, listening to the storm gossip with itself. Then, beneath the squall, another sound, a crump like distant cannon. She rose, heart thundering. A second crump followed, closer. Dynamite. Boots pounded upstairs. Hart burst in, rifle in hand. "Varner's set charges early," he barked. "Gulch Wall will slide if we don't stop him. Quinn's already saddling the buckskin." Evelina buckled. Her cloak. "What can I do?" Hart tossed her a lantern. "Light the ridge path. If that wall goes, valley floods with spoil and ash. We lose pasture, water table, maybe the bunkhouse. We lose everything." She struck a match as Quinn galloped past the window, silhouette a brief cutout of lightning. Rain flattened against glass. The ledger room trembled with another distant detonation. Evelina followed Hart into the storm, lantern held high, each gust threatening to drown the flame. Mud sucked at her boots, sleet razored her cheeks. Somewhere ahead, Quinn's horse screamed, then a roar like the world splitting. The ridge path glowed with dim lantern light. Evelina crested the rise in time to see the gulch wall shudder, chunks sloughing into the black moor below. Quinn skidded his horse sideways, silhouetted against the falling earth, while a figure in oilskins, Varner, stood atop a berm, fuse coil in hand. Hart shouldered his rifle, but before he could fire, a slab of sandstone sheared free, avalanching. Toward the pasture fence and toward Evelina, she stumbled back, heel catching in shale. Rain blurred everything, but a shape lunged from the dark. Quinn, dismounted, arms outstretched. He tackled her sideways, the sandstone crashing inches from where she'd stood. Mud swallowed them. Quinn rolled first, dragging her clear as another blast shook the ground. Varner's laughter knifed through storm. Quinn rose, fury stoked in. His silence. He started toward Varner, but the overseer lit a final fuse and flung it under a protruding seam. Flame bit powder. Varner wheeled his horse, fleeing downslope. Quinn reached the fuse, too short to yank loose. He looked at Evelina, eyes iron. She understood. "Run," he mouthed, but she grabbed his wrist. Heart battering her ribs, she shook her head. Once, hard. If the gulch wall fell, the ranch died, and with it everyone's second chances. A blink of agreement passed between them. Quinn snatched her lantern, smashed it open, and doused the wick with rainwater, extinguishing light, but gaining oil. He poured the slick over the fuse knot, hoping to choke the burn. It hissed, slowed, stopped an inch from the dynamite plug. For a breathless eternity they waited. Only storm and their ragged breathing filled the void. The seam held. Quinn exhaled, short, almost a laugh. Then from below, hooves clattered. Up the path, Hart arrived with two ranch hands, rifles trained downslope, where Varner vanished into darkness. Evelina's pulse thundered in her ears as Quinn offered a hand up. Mud dripped from his coat sleeve. She took it, stepped toward him, closer than courtesy allowed, and felt the tremor in his grip. Not fear, relief. Lightning flared, illuminating them chest to cheek, and in that sharp, white instant, she saw something roar in his eyes, mirrored perhaps in her own, something that made the storm feel suddenly distant. Then thunder cracked, and the moment shattered. Hart ordered them off the ridge before another charge could be buried. They obeyed, yet as they descended, Evelina did not let go of Quinn's hand, and he did not ask her to. The following dawn, Half Moon stood intact, though gullies scarred the pasture where Varner's explosions had clawed shallow graves. Evelina inspected the ledgers by lamplight. Profit columns still bled red, but now she saw pathways. Contracts Varner had hidden, expenses double-billed. She annotated margins, building a scaffold of numbers to keep the auditors honest. Knock at the frame startled her. Alden Quinn, coat fresh, boots cleaned of mud. He cleared his throat, producing from behind his back a single blue columbine, the only blossom brave enough to bloom on this wind-flayed plateau. He offered it, silent. Evelina's lungs forgot air. Scar tissue tingled, alive in the cool morning. Light. She accepted the flower, placed it between ledger pages to press. Their eyes held, and words seemed suddenly unnecessary. A distant whistle, the morning freight out of Greystone, floated across the fields. It carried coal cars, mailbags, rumors. It carried, Evelina realized, a world poised to judge. Quinn touched the brim of his hat, turned to leave, but paused. "Stay for supper?" he asked. 2 more words than usual, and each costing him dear. "Yes," she said, the syllable warm on her tongue. Out on the porch, a breeze lifted the flower scent, mingling it with pine resin and horse sweat. Evelina closed the ledger, spine snapping shut around the pressed columbine, and felt the hinge of her life swing toward something she had not dared name. But storm-birthed peace is fragile. Beyond the hills, smoke columns rose. Varnas, men, burning deadfall to clear a new drill site. Hart's fight had just begun, and with it hers. She breathed deep, tasted coal dust and promise, and somewhere behind her ribcage, the quiet conversation with God resumed. Not a plea this time, but a pledge. But the hush did not hold. A door slammed somewhere in the rear annex, a hollow bang that rolled through the sanctuary like distant thunder. Evelina started, the hymnal slipping from her lap and fanning across the plank floor. She bent to gather the pages, scarred, cheek burning with sudden self-conscious heat, but a pair of brown boots appeared in front of her before she could rise. "Leave it, ma'am," came a voice as soft as dusk over wheat. It was Devlin Hart, the silent cowboy who had judged her scars without turning away, who had pressed an iron rough palm to his heart when they first met outside the telegraph office. As though staking a private oath, Evelina straightened, clutching the hymnal's empty spine. "I'm not a ma'am," she said, then winced, too sharp, too defensive. This man's quiet steadiness unbalanced her more than outright cruelty ever could. "I mean, nobody calls me that. Widow Whitlock will do." Devlin gave the faintest nod, eyes shifting to the scattered music. He knelt, one long, graceful fold of limbs, and began sliding pages into a neat pile. "You planning to sing these come Sunday?" he asked. "If Pastor Finch allows. My voice isn't what it was. Burn fumes had scorched her lungs 8 years ago. Every breath still rasped on cold mornings." Devlin's gloved thumb paused on the corner of a page. Number 53, Rock of Ages. "Doesn't have to be perfect," he murmured. "Only has to be honest." Heat washed her face anew, though the sanctuary was colder than a barn loft. She opened her mouth to answer, but a second slam cut across the stillness, closer this time. Footsteps scuffed along the side aisle, deliberate and heavy. Evelina glimpsed a silhouette between the pillars, broad shoulders, collar turned. Against sleet, not the pastor, not any parishioner she recognized from yesterday's meager midweek worship. Devlin rose without hurry, pressing the hymn pages into Evelina's hands. "Stay by the pulpit," he said, voice milder than morning milk, but carrying an iron that brooked no argument. She obeyed, sliding behind the lectern where Reverend Finch's worn Bible lay open. From that vantage, the nave stretched before her, like empty winter fields. Devlin stepped into the center aisle, hat brim shadowing his eyes. "Help you, stranger?" The newcomer halted beneath the cracked rose window. Lamplight caught a livid scar that split his chin, old knife-work gone shiny. "Name's Blount," he drawled. "I haul ore for the company. Heard a rumor said a Whitlock widow arrived yesterday off the Cheyenne coach." His gaze crawled the pews until it hooked Evelina's face. "Figure that be you." Cold pinched her lungs. She laid a calming hand on the pulpit edge. "Have we met, Mr. Blount?" "Not yet." He shifted his coat aside, revealing a revolver, holstered but unbuttoned. "But me and some boys laid track with your husband before he died jumping that switch. Engine south of Laramie. He owed us wages, 6 months' worth. Seems fair you settle the account." Devlin's stance changed so subtly, Evelina nearly missed it. Shoulders lowering a fraction, right boot angling 45 degrees. A fighting. Posture disguised as slouch. Company handles payroll, Devlin replied. Try the foreman's shack. Blount spat on the church floor, streak of tobacco pooling against pine. Foreman says Hiram Whitlock spent his drawer before he cashed it. Cards mostly, liquor. But you're flesh of his flesh. Debt follows blood. A slow burn rose. Behind Evelina's ribs, shame, anger, the old helpless fury she had vowed never to taste again. She stepped from behind the lectern. "My husband never drank," she said, careful to keep her voice steady. "And he lost more in that boiler burst than any of you. I owe you nothing." Blount's smile crept like frost. "Your face says different." His fingers brushed the revolver grip. "Scarred folk know pain, and folks who know pain usually pay quick to avoid more." Devlin's reply came soft as falling ash. "Gun stays holstered while you're inside the Lord's house. Step outside if you aim to break commandments." Blount barked laughter. "Didn't peg heart for a Bible man. Heard all you do is punch cattle and keep your mouth shut." "Mouth still shut," Devlin answered, voice barely above a breath. "But the gun on my hip will speak if yours does. Your choice, Mr. Blount." The sanctuary seemed to shrink around. Them, every pew a loaded spring. Evelina felt her pulse throb in the scarred plane of her cheek. If bloodshed splattered these walls because of her debt, her dead husband's lies, she would never forgive herself. She drew a ragged breath. "I can pay something," she said, though her purse held only 3 silver pieces and a battered copper. "Give me time to—" "Time's a luxury," Blount cut in. "Train leaves at dusk. I'm on it. Debt travels with me unless it's settled. $50, cash. Bring it to the freight office or I'll come collect tonight." He tipped his hat to Evelina, contempt passing for courtesy, then pivoted toward the side door. Before leaving, he tossed a final glance at Devlin. "Reckon you keep the Sabbath holy, heart. Keep out of what ain't yours." The door banged. Silence. Swelled, taut as wire. Devlin exhaled first. $50, he repeated, tone unreadable. "I don't have 5, Evelina whispered. The weight of it pressed on her chest like fresh ash. "And the ledger Hiram left me shows nothing of cards or drink. He wrote that he was saving for a house." She strangled a laugh. Guess that was a lie, like everything else. Devlin watched sleet ghost across the tall windows. "Blount's trouble. Bird dog for Sinclair Mining. They squeeze widows because payroll goes farther when fear does the collecting. But men like him fold when faced square." "You faced him already," she said. "Didn't seem to fold." Devlin's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "He'll fold before nightfall, trust me. But trust ain't what you owe. Come, let's talk to Mrs. Landry, see if she's heard other claims. Then we'll speak with the sheriff." The afternoon bled grey. Along Main Street, coal wagons rattled past, leaving bitter smoke that clung to the tongue. Evelina hurried beside Devlin, mind churning. Every storefront window reflected her scar like a burning brand. $50. 2 years' seamstress wages, if any. Woman here would hire a stitcher whose face scared the children. At the corner she stopped short. A crowd swarmed the telegraph pole where news sheets were posted. "Miners walk out. Pay dispute. Turns violent at Redstone Canyon." Beneath the headline, a list of casualties, 12 names. She scanned them once, twice, no Whitlock, thank God. But despair pooled anyway. Wives would grieve tonight. Widows would wake tomorrow to debts they never signed for. Devlin touched her sleeve. "This town'll tear apart before spring if Sinclair keeps choking wages. Sheriff's hands are tied. Company owns the badge. As tight as the payroll. So there is no help," Evelina said, voice flat. "Not from law." Devlin's gaze tracked a company agent swaggering past with 2 Pinkerton men in tow. "Helps what neighbors make themselves, Widow Whitlock." He tapped the folded hymn pages in her satchel. "You still aiming to sing come Sunday?" She blinked. "Yes, I promised Reverend Finch I'd lead 2 pieces. Why? Because folks here stop listening to each other, but they still hear a good song." Hear truth carried on a tune. Minds killed that truth long before they killed flesh. Devlin stepped aside as a coal wagon thundered by. You want Blount gone. Make this town remember its throat. Remind them voices carry farther together than alone. His words struck flint inside her. Music, her first love before fire, took her face. Might, yet serve. She squared her shoulders. Then you'll stand by me, Mr. Hart, debt or no debt. Name's Devlin, he said quietly, and standing's what I'm built for. Half a block away, the depot whistle shrieked. 3 blasts that rattled shop glass. Evelina flinched as though struck. Dusk already? No, only the early freight. A warning that daylight was short in winter, and chances shorter. Devlin's gaze sharpened toward the plume of steam beyond the depot roof. Change of plan. Blount's not waiting till night. He'll slip aboard that westbound car now. Debt unpaid, but rumor left to fester. Come, run. They ran. Snow slurry churned beneath their boots as they cut down an alley scented of horse urine. And wet coal. Evelina's lungs burned, scars tightening with each desperate breath, yet fear lent her speed. She would not live under a shadow of false debt, would not bow her head to the next Blount who came calling. The freight platform loomed, a hive of boxcars clanking couplers. Blount stood near the open door of a livestock car, coin pouch hefted in his fist like prized chicken feed. 2 Pinkertons idled beside him, rifles casual but ready. Devlin slowed to a prowl. Stay behind those crates, he whispered. If shooting starts, shooting won't finish anything, Evelina hissed. Words, remember, voices together. She darted before he could grab her arm. Blount turned at her approach, grinning yellow. Decided you'd rather pay than pray, eh? She planted herself between him and the car door. I decided you'd rather hear the truth. My husband never owed you a penny. He recorded every wage, every expense. I have the ledger, Blount snorted. Ledger's ink, debt's blood, you got 50 or not? Evelina's knees shook, but her voice held. No, but I have something else. She tipped back her hood, so sleet slicked the ruined half of her face. Gasps fluttered along the platform. Even the Pinkertons recoiled. She swung to face the crowd gathering near the freight office. Miners off shift, wives fetching parcels, children chasing coal dust. She raised her chin. This scar, price of a factory foreman who cut corners on safety so shareholders pocketed more. My husband, price of a boiler patched with tar so trains ran on cheap miracles. How many prices? Have you paid so men like Blount can count coin that isn't theirs? A murmur rippled, the low growl of shame turning to anger. Evelina took the hymnal pages from her satchel and thrust them at a girl holding a paper doll. Do you read music, child? The girl nodded, wide-eyed. Then start us. Evelina's voice quavered, but resolve steeled it. Number 53. She turned so Blount heard every word. Rock of Ages, because rock doesn't move for men who gamble with people's lives. The girl began, high and tentative. Rock of Ages, cleft for me. Evelina joined, voice rasped but strong enough. 2 elders added a baritone thread. A mother wove alto. Pitch wavered, then found itself like iron filings to a magnet. Within half a verse, the platform vibrated with harmony. Halfway through the second chorus, Evelina lifted her voice above the sway of notes. This story took us a long time. If you like it, subscribe. Now back to the story. The sudden, odd sentence, a habit from the traveling revival channel Reverend Finch broadcast, startled laughter from the miners. Laughter turned to boldness. They sang louder, drowning the train's hiss. Blount's face purpled. He tried to shove past her, but Devlin appeared, one hand on the livestock car's sliding latch. Car's full, he lied. Next freights. Tuesday. Plenty time to collect what you're owed. If the town agrees, the debt exists. Behind them the hymn soared, no longer polite but defiant. Let me hide myself in thee. Blount's gaze flicked to the crowd. Dozens now, united by song. He weighed coin purse against rifle barrel, against the mathematics of outnumbered men. Sleet turned to honest snow, whitening his hat brim like surrender dust. He spat once, hard. "Ain't worth $50 damn." Turning, he stomped down the platform. The Pinkertons hesitated, then followed, rifles drooping. When the last note faded, Evelina's throat felt torn raw, but joy, clean, fierce, bloomed in its place. The miners tipped caps, children clapped mittened hands. Someone shouted for 3 cheers. Devlin simply looked at her, heat behind his steady eyes that made the coal smoke disappear. "Debt's gone," he said quietly, "but trouble'll come back. Sinclair won't let this pass." Evelina touched the hymnal page, snow melting on ink. "Then we sing again, louder, together." A whistle shrilled, the passenger coach arriving. Crowds shifted, waves parting. Evelina turned to leave, but Devlin caught her elbow. "One more." "A thing," he murmured. "Blount's lie about cards. Might not be lie. Ledger can be doctored." He hesitated. "I think Hiram was saving, true, but not for a house, for escape. Men trapped between debt and mine shafts do foolish things." The weight she thought lifted settled heavier. "You believe he left me, willingly." "I believe he died carrying desperation." Devlin's thumb brushed the edge of her sleeve, a touch that felt like promise. "And desperation has roots. If we don't cut them, they'll drag you down next." Porter's lamp swung, casting new faces through steam, travelers disembarking. One figure froze at sight of Evelina, grip tightening on a medical satchel stamped with the Denver hospital crest. The woman's eyes widened. She stepped forward, snowflakes catching in raven dark hair. "My God," she whispered, voice breaking. Lena Whitlock." Evelina's breath stopped. Only 2 souls alive still called her Lena, and one of them was ash in Pennsylvania soil. "Marianne," she said, name slicing air like sleigh bells. "Her sister." Evelina staggered, pulse roaring. Marianne rushed, arms out. But Devlin moved first, steadying Evelina's back so she did not fall. Snow swirled. The train hissed departure warnings. And Evelina Whitlock found herself caught between the man who promised a future and the sister who embodied a past she thought forever burnt away. The whistle screamed, cliffhanger. Who had stepped from the shadows without stirring a single mote of dust. Devlin Hart's hat brim cut a dark half-moon over his eyes, but the lantern light caught the silver of the tiny concho that pinned the crown. One bright star in a night of battered felt. He knelt on one knee, gathering the loose hymnal pages with careful fingers, and handed them up to Evelina without meeting her gaze. It would have been easier to endure a sudden slap than that gentle courtesy. Pity she could handle, pity kept its distance, but respect pressed too close to the raw places. Still she said, "Thank you," because manners were a shield, and she needed every scrap of armor. Devlin only inclined his head. In the month since she'd arrived by stage, he had spoken fewer than 24 words, yet each syllable landed like a nail driven sure and straight. The town called him a mute behind his back. But Evelina had heard his voice more than once. Low, even, and edged with caution, the way a rancher eases through a gate at dusk when the coyotes are running. He chose silence the same way a veteran chooses which way to sit in a saloon, always facing the door. She resettled on the pew, pulse still thudding from the slammed annex door, and Devlin took the seat 3 rows behind her, the way he did every Wednesday morning, never closer, never farther. A respectful distance, a sentinel's distance. The Reverend entered a few minutes later with his Bible already open, and his brow creased deeper than the binding. Only 5 parishioners came, for midweek services these days, and the coal company saw that as proof the town's backbone was gone. Evelina wondered if the company men had ever tried to pray, with ash stinging the throat. Halfway through the first hymn, a tremulous rendition of Rock of Ages, the front doors burst wide. Wind slashed in, scattering hymnals, and with It came Cyrus Taggart, foreman of Blackstone Coal. His slicked hair was plastered with sleet, and his eyes shone fever-bright. "Reverend," he barked, stalking down the aisle, "I need half the congregation. Dynamite misfired in the south shaft. We've got men trapped and the breakers flooded." The Reverend shut his hymnal. "Calmly, Cyrus. Tell us what you know." "What I know," Taggart growled, "is the whole ridge'll slide if we don't shore those timbers. I need hands, lanterns, and rope, now." A murmur rippled across the pews. Evelina's stomach hollowed. Flooded breakers meant cold water and black water both, choking any miner who hadn't been crushed outright. Before the Reverend could answer, Devlin Hart stood. He walked to the foreman with the unhurried stride of a man measuring danger. "How many?" he asked. Taggart bristled. "6 that we counted, maybe more." "Why? You aiming to charge me a hero's wage?" Devlin's jaw tightened. "No, wage." He glanced back. "But we'll need the church ladders. Get the carpenter rigging them as stretchers." The Reverend nodded, already moving. People rose from the pews in a wave, and Evelina found herself gathering shawls and lanterns before she'd made any conscious choice. The scar along her jaw prickled in the cold draught. She thought of clay-sealed timbers groaning, of shoulders, too weary to brace them, of water filling lungs before a prayer could reach heaven. If silence was Devlin's armor, this was hers. Do the next necessary thing before fear could take hold. Outside, sleet turned to needles. The mine mouth yawned at the edge of town. A black wound bandaged with sagging boards. Smoke from the engine house guttered sideways in the wind, carrying the sour tang of wet powder. Taggart bullied men into teams, cursing them for their shaking hands, but it was Devlin's clipped instructions they followed. Lanterns trimmed low to save oil, ropes knotted on every yard mark, shovels spaced along the drift like rungs on a ladder. Evelina pressed her back to the lee side of the tool shed, gathering carbide lamps into a canvas satchel. She told herself the sting in her eyes came from wind, not terror. She'd buried a husband claimed by fire. She would not watch new widows born of water. Devlin appeared beside her. "These'll foul in the flood," he said, touching the lamps. "We take hand torches, tar-dipped. If water comes, lift high, so the flame eats pitch above the line." She nodded, replacing the gear. Their hands brushed once, her gloved fingers against his calloused palm, and the contact sparked a heat that was almost pain. He looked away first, as if worried the touch had shouted louder than words. The south shaft had never been more than a gamble carved into shale. The main drift angled steep, then flattened where the seam widened. Wooden stagings lined the walls, creaking like hull planks on a bad sea. The farther they went, the thicker the air grew with coal dust and powder smoke. Water lapped at their boots within 50 yards, ankle-deep and rising. 100 yards in, they found the first body, Jonas Miller, face half hidden under a slurry of soot. Taggart swore and shoved past, barking at the Reverend to say rights. Later. Devlin helped ease the man onto a ladder stretcher, but Evelina saw the tiny flecks of his jaw. Fury contained for now, but building pressure. Another 100 yards, and they reached the blowout. The blast had chewed a cavern the size of a warehouse, collapsing the roof and clogging the drift with timber scraps and slate chunks. Somewhere beyond the rubble came the faintest tapping, metal striking rock in a desperate morse. The trapped men. Devlin shouldered through the crowd of miners milling in shock. "We dig from the left. Support beams every 3 feet. Keep the spoil close. Stack it underfoot or the drift sinks." Taggart sneered. "Thought you quit Blackstone, Hart. Lost your appetite for dirt." "Found a bigger appetite for daylight," Devlin answered, eyes on Evelina, though she could not fathom what he saw there. "But daylight's no use to a man buried under ton weight." Sensing rebellion, Taggart grabbed a pick and hacked at the right-hand wall. A crack the width of a thumbnail split up the arch. Devlin swore and hauled him back just as a fist-sized rock dropped, smashing Taggart's lantern. The flame, hissed out in the rising water. "Left side," Devlin repeated, voice razor-thin, "or pray the ridge comes down quick." For an hour they dug, the miners, the Reverend, even Taggart, after Devlin shoved a shovel into his hands and told him to move dirt or drown standing. Evelina braced timbers, cut rope lengths with numb hands, and whispered the rhythm of her dead husband's breathing to keep panic chained. On the other side of the cave-in, the Morse tapping faltered. She prayed without lips again. At last, the pickhead punched through slate to open air. A whisper of fresher air flowed out, heavy with moisture but blessedly breathable. 2 miners slithered through the gap. Moments later they reappeared, dragging the first survivor, a boy no more than 14, eyes wide as eclipse moons. The rescue became a blur. Ropes hauling limp bodies, Devlin's calm orders, Taggart's increasingly frantic counting. 4 survivors, 5. The last one came out barely alive, coughing water and clots of coal dust. When the miners checked names, 2 were still missing, including Eli Byrne, the only man Evelina had spoken more than a greeting to since arriving. He had delivered her trunk to the boarding house and touched the brim of his cap as if she were royalty. She remembered because no one else in town had dared. Devlin met her gaze in the lantern gloom. "We go back," he said, though his shoulders sagged like beams under too much roof. "There's a pocket beyond the cut where water pools. If they made it, they'll be there." Taggart spat black. "Phlegm. Pockets below the fault line. No footing. You'll sink." "Then sink," Devlin answered, and tied the rescue rope around his waist. He slipped into the breach like a ghost returning to its grave. Minutes passed. The rope jerked once, twice, then wrenched tight. Evelina crouched, heart hammering. A foreman on the line shouted, "He found one," and men heaved until their backs popped. Devlin emerged, half-submerged in soot-thick water, dragging Eli Byrne. The mine roar masked Devlin's ragged breathing, but Evelina saw the tremor run through his frame as he handed Eli over. "One left. Give me 5 minutes," he panted. "Then pull," Taggart snarled. "That pocket's drained. The last man's done." Devlin's stare cut colder than the water. "Men ain't done till you bury them." He disappeared again. Sleet had turned to snow by the time the rescue crew staggered into grey daylight. Eli coughed alive on a stretcher, feverish but breathing. The other survivors huddled under blankets. Stretcher-bearers laid 3 bodies beneath tarps. Jonas Miller, Jonah Crow, and the last man Devlin found, Thomas Griggs, the one Taggart said was already done. Devlin himself emerged last, clothing sluicing water, eyes ringed with coal dust like war paint. He shivered only once. Then the chill sank so deep it stilled even the tremor. Evelina wrapped her wool shawl around his shoulders before he could refuse. He looked down at her, throat working, and she realized he wasn't numb. He was quaking, but inside where no one could see. She whispered, "You did what had to be done." He closed his eyes. Doesn't always help. Then, louder for the crowd, "Thomas Griggs has a wife at Timber Creek Ranch. Someone ride." Men scattered. The Reverend whispered prayers over the bodies. Taggart lurked at the edge, face pinched between fury and shame. That evening, Evelina delivered hot broth to the bunkhouse where the survivors lay. The Reverend had turned the meeting hall into a ward, but space was scarce. Miners slept anywhere, except the boarding rooms Blackstone charged 10 cents extra for. She lingered until Eli Byrne's fever broke at midnight. Outside, the sky cleared. Starlight silvered the ridge, and the mine's boiler stacks pulsed red-orange. She heard hoofbeats on packed snow and followed the sound to the stock corral. Devlin leaned against the rail, hat tipped back, studying the heavens as if reading dispatches. He'd changed clothes but not washed the coal streaks from his skin, the marks lying like bruises. "Broth's gone. I can heat more," she offered. He shook his head. "Men'll rest easier seeing you stand watch than tasting broth they can't swallow." Evelina flushed, unsure if it was compliment. You saved 5 lives. Devlin's mouth twitched. 6 would have sat easier. Cyrus Taggart will spin this, she said. Make himself hero, blame you for the loss. A shrug. Truth. Knows the road home even when lies throw rocks. Silence flowed in. Owl wings beat across the field. A coyote yipped, lonely and sharp. At last, she asked what had burned her tongue all day. Why did you really leave Blackston? He didn't answer at first. Snow squeaked under his boot as he shifted. Because the seams played thin, and Taggart keeps cutting corners. Because I knew today would come, and I ain't fond of graves. He hesitated. And because I never forgot the fire that scarred your face. Ice crackled in her chest. You weren't there. I was on a drive in the Cherokee Strip when news reached camp. A lumber town in Colorado burned flat. A woman hauled 3 children from a boarding house before the roof caved. Lost her husband, saved 2 of the little ones, but the third... His voice frayed like rope. Story stuck. Evelina's breath clouded between them. Calcite. My first marriage, my last winter of hope. He faced her fully now, moonlight tracing the scar down her cheek, the healed burns along her throat. He didn't flinch. Instead, he removed his gloves. Under the right sleeve, half his forearm was a web of old burns, paler than the rest of his sun-browned skin. Thought I'd outwalk the fire, he said, but it travels in a man as much as on the wind. She touched the scarred skin gently. The contact cracked something open, him or her, she couldn't tell. For one heartbeat, she felt the heat of the long-dead blaze, heard the roar of beams collapsing, smelled pine resin and ashes. Then the night sucked the memory away, leaving only a terrible understanding. Grief recognizes its own. Someone coming, Devlin murmured, stepping back. A shape trotted from the mine road, Taggart on a lathered bay, coat flapping. He reined. Odd. Hart! He shouted. Company agent wired from Cheyenne, wants a full report, needs signatures, yours included. I quit. Not in writing, you didn't. They'll dock pay from every man in your crew, unless I've got your stub on the ledger. Devlin's shoulders set. Men already lost wages pulling bodies. So sign, and they won't lose more. Evelina eased forward. Foreman Taggart, surely this can wait till dawn. Taggart's eyes gleamed. Widow Whitlock meddling again? Might be the company should charge board for that bunkhouse care. Nothing's free under this sky. Devlin stepped between them. Enough, I'll ride to your office. Taggart smirked. Office moved to the ridge spur. Steam hut by the tipple. Safer paperwork away from town drunks. The spur lay miles out, past trestles that groaned even in calm. Evelina felt the night rear like a spooked mare. She gripped Devlin's arm. Don't. His eyes met hers. Something unsaid passed, promise or apology. Then he swung into the saddle Taggart offered. Won't be long, he murmured. Taggart wheeled his bay, and they galloped toward the ridge mouth. Snow swallowed hoofbeats. Evelina waited 1 hour, then 2. Dawn's first grey thumbprint smudged the eastern sky, but no riders returned. She saddled the Reverend's mule, only mount left, and followed the ridge trail. Halfway up, she smelled smoke. Not coal smoke, pine pitch and kerosene. Flames licked the black silhouette of the steam hut, casting a bloom of orange against the cliff face. The mule balked. She slid off, heart thrashing, and ran the last yards. The hut was a pyre. Walls collapsed inward. Icicles melted in a hiss. Near the door lay 2 figures. Taggart, throat cut ear to ear, and a man face down, wrists bound, clothes soaked in kerosene. The body was head to toe flame. It wore Devlin Hart's hat. Evelina's scream tore the morning wide open. And in that thunder-quiet second, Evelina realized the nightmare she had feared all her life was walking toward her on iron heels. Deputy Liam Laird's revolver dug a fresh bruise between her shoulder blades as he marched her out of the church's sacristy into the side yard. Snow whispered around the eaves, thin, lacy, almost gentle. yet every flake felt like ash upon her cheek. 20 paces ahead, Gideon Sloat waited beneath a soot-black lantern, his overcoat collar razored high against the wind, his smile razored higher. Devlin Hart trailed 3 yards behind, shackled at the wrists, hat missing, left temple matted crimson where the butt of Laird's Colt had found bone. The sight of that wound, more than the gun at her back, made Evelina taste iron. She had learned to carry pain, her own scar proved that, but seeing it worn by the man who had claimed her with a single silent nod felt like God twisting the brand deeper. Sloat raised one gloved hand. "That's far enough, Deputy. Mrs. Whitlock and I can talk civil without steel at her spine." "Sir, holster it." The order cut clean. Laird obeyed, but not before flicking Devlin's ear with the muzzle, a petty cruelty that earned a growl from the ranch hand flanking them. Devlin neither flinched nor spoke. His eyes stayed on Evelina, and in them she read an apology as wide as the Wyoming horizon. The lantern above Sloat swung, casting knife-edged shadows. Behind him waited 4 more men, 2 deputies bought by fear, 2 Pinkerton mercenaries bought by coin. Their rifles tracked sleet like predators tracking spoor. Sloat stepped forward. "You cost me 50,000 in freight permits when you exposed the bribe ledger's widow. Do you know what kind of hole that leaves in a man's pride?" Evelina swallowed. Her voice came out hoarse but steady. "A hole wide enough for daylight. That frightens you more than losing money. A single laugh. No mirth. Daylight's a funny thing. Burns clean, but only what it touches, which is why rot hides under planks or behind scarred cheeks." His gaze lingered on her burn mark, trying to unmake her with shame. She did not lower her face. "You can't threaten me with what I already wear." "Threaten? I'm past that. I'm bargaining." He produced a folded contract. "Sign a statement retracting every word in your affidavit. Claim Deputy Laird forged the ledgers to slander me. I'll put you on the next train east with $500 cash. No charges, no gallows for the cowboy." Devlin answered for her, without words. He tipped his chin once. "No." Evelina felt the tremor in her chest settle. "I won't trade truth for comfort." Sloat sighed. "Then we proceed by older laws." He nodded to the Pinkertons. "Tree that man. Let her witness consequence." The mercenaries advanced. Devlin offered no struggle until they reached for his hatless head. Then the stillness snapped. He pivoted, braced, and drove one Pinkerton into the other, chains snapping taut like bullwhips. Laird swore, drew steel. Everything happened inside one exhale. Evelina stamped Laird's wrist with her heel. The Colt fired into snow. Devlin dove, caught the fallen revolver with bound hands, rolled behind the well house. Shots cracked, lantern glass burst, flinging oil fire across sleet. Sloat shouted orders drowned by gun thunder. Rifles flashed from the porch. Slugs chewed cedar posts. Devlin's answer was a single measured bark. One Pinkerton dropped, thigh shattered. He vanished again into smoke and flame like a coyote made of shadow. Evelina crawled to the sacristy wall, fingers bleeding, heart louder than bullets. She remembered the first inferno, the one that scarred her, and smelled the same tarry pitch, felt the same furnace breath. But this time she refused to burn, running. She burned, standing. Laird recovered, yanked her upright, knife at her throat. "Show yourself, Hart, or I carve your woman pretty." Devlin stepped from the smoke, hands still cuffed, revolver leveled. "Drop steel," he said. 3 syllables, first words she'd ever heard from him. Shock flickered across faces. The silent cowboy could speak. Sloat placed his derringer to Devlin's ribs. "Shoot my deputy, I kill you first." Evelina drew breath. "Gideon." He glanced. She spat blood into his eye. In that instant, Devlin fired, not at Laird, but at the chain binding his wrists. The link shattered, his second round slammed Sloat's derringer skyward. Third, fourth, fifth, too quick to count, dropped the porch rifleman. Laird shrieked, knife nicking her collarbone. Devlin charged. The deputy thrust Evelina forward like a shield. She twisted, using the momentum, sending both of them into the snow. Devlin vaulted over them, boot catching Laird's jaw. Knife flew. Colt roared one last time. Silence fell but for sleet hissing on burning oil. Judge Thaddeus Crane arrived 2 hours later, summoned by telegraph from Casper. His gavel echoed in the ruined sanctuary, pronouncing Gideon Sloat, Liam Laird, and the surviving Pinkerton guilty of conspiracy, fraud, kidnapping, and attempted murder. Sentence: hanging at dawn. Crane asked Devlin Hart why he never spoke in town. Devlin answered, listening buys more peace than talking spends. A week passed. Greystone Ridge scraped the burn soot off its clapboards, hoisted fresh timbers, and nailed up a new sign outside the Ridgeline School. Whitlock Hart Learning Hall. Evelina taught letters in the front room. Devlin taught woodcraft and the quiet virtues behind the building. Every evening he waited as she banked the pot-bellied stove. Then they walked home through cold dusk, hand in hand, boots crunching cinder snow. Under February stars, she asked, "Why did you claim me that?" "First day?" He said, "Because you already stood taller than every nightmare in this territory. I only lent you a shadow." She brushed his healed temple. "Then keep lending it. I like the shade." The wind carried coal dust towards somewhere else. Greystone smelled of sapling pine and fresh-cut justice. 2 more great stories are next. Don't miss them. Subscribe and turn on notifications.